We welcome you to another live edition of the Sports Box, brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports in Hamilton. Showcase Sports for the elite athlete. And by our friends over at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and check them out at www.crowdplayapp.com for details. Ladies and gentlemen, it's showtime.
What is up, guys? As always, we're here. It's Friday night, a little bit after 9. Really excited. Really happy to have you guys here. Me and Noah both have been working really hard getting prepared for this show tonight to put our best foot forward. Noah, I'm really excited to have you on here, man. I know you put a lot of work into it today. I know we're really excited to talk some NHL.
Yeah, man, I like 3.5 hours of work winning this, so hopefully it goes well. I'm really excited for this one.
Yeah, most definitely. And, I've been reading articles all day at work trying to get caught up. I took some notes here for the last couple hours going over stuff, some more. But before we go ahead and do a full-on dive into NHL playoffs and go over all the matchups and, key points and all that kind of stuff, we did real quickly want to go over the NFL schedule. Maybe some games that me and Noah are really looking forward to, some of the ones that jump out as being, potential season definers on the schedule. I will say, Noah, before we go into some specific games, one thing that is kind of starting to bother me with the NFL is the fact that they try to get us all excited for these award shows. The schedule release, obviously, and then the day of, way before the show comes on, they just release all the information, and you're like, well, if I already know the results, what's the point of watching?
Yeah, I know what you mean, Garth. That's something I've always really never understood why they do it. It just kind of defeats the entire purpose of having these award shows, which is supposed to be, a dramatic reveal and all that, if they just kind of tweet it out, a little bit before. So, yeah, I definitely agree with you there. That's always been something really weird, honestly.
Yeah, and, I think that diving right into the games here now, I think that probably the number one game that jumped out at everybody is, that I believe it's week 4. The Bucs go up there to Foxborough to take on the Patriots. Obviously, Brady's first game back in Foxborough since leaving the Patriots. And, I saw a stat there where they went off of season averages for Brady last year, yards per game. He could potentially be breaking Drew Brees' all-time record for passing yards. The excitement's already here now, even though we're months away. The ticket prices are outrageous. Something like $1,100 a person is the cheapest that you could get right now.
I know, Garth. I saw that. That is absolutely insane. And, I wrote down a little list of all the primetime games that I thought were interesting. And I didn't go through all the games because that'd just be too much work. And I think you're right. I think week 4 is one I had noted down, the Bucs and the Patriots. That's a very interesting one. Obviously, the Bucs defending Super Bowl champions, Tom Brady making his return. But the most interesting I found, or the most interesting thing I think about is that stat. You mentioned that he could actually pass Drew Brees in passing yards during that game. If he goes with a similar, season average like the one he had last year, how crazy would that be, Garth? If he could break a record like that against his former team, he wants to prove a point to Bill Belichick after not, being let go, obviously, winning a Super Bowl. He's always the guy that's thrived best with a chip on his shoulder, so that's going to be pretty insane to watch. It's probably the favorite game that I picked out for this season.
Yeah, and, one cool thing that I'm really looking forward to, it might not be the best game for everybody, but my Chargers do get 3 primetime games there in SoFi Stadium, which, if you guys didn't know, that is where the Super Bowl is being held this season. I'm really hoping that we get some fans in there. We're not outnumbered 10-1 like we were in the StubHub Center or Arena, whatever you want to call that place that we were stuck playing at. I'm really excited for the Chargers to get some primetime games, for Justin Herbert to kind of show the world, if anybody didn't somehow already see what he did last season, on the primetime stage. But, another game that jumps out at me, Noah, is – sorry, this froze on me real quick. Chiefs-Ravens, week 2, that jumps out at me. As well as the Packers-Chiefs in week 9. Should Aaron Rodgers, still be there, which, like we said last week, we do think he is going to be there. That should be a really good game, in my opinion. Aaron Rodgers going at it with Patty Mahomes.
I know, man. That's going to be absolutely insane. And like you said, Chiefs-Ravens week 2, we'll see if the Ravens can actually finally get a win there against them. But yeah, man, your Chargers, week 11 against the Steelers, Sunday Night Football, that's looking like a good game. And then week 15, Thursday Night Football against the Chiefs. Um, two high-profile games for you for you guys against, really strong teams from last year. So you've got to be very excited about that. And, like we discussed last week, you guys made a lot of improvements. So maybe you can actually, do a really good job in those games, compete, maybe even get a win.
Yeah, I won't go into too much detail, but like we said last week, I really expect my Chargers to compete for a wild card spot, be at that number 2 spot in the division. Not quite, caught up with the Chiefs completely, but we're making the right moves to close that gap. Going down the list here, one other game, Noah, that really jumps out at me is the Bills at the Bucs, week 14. That's actually a game that if ticket prices aren't outrageous, I might go to, being a fan of the Bills, and not really a fan of the Bucs, but a big fan of Tom Brady. I feel like that would be a pretty cool game to go and witness, being close to the Tampa area. And that could be a really big game for the Bills. Not so much the Bucs. I mean, they're home probably by week 14. There might not be too much on the line for them in terms of making the playoffs. Maybe might need it for divisional standings, but I feel like that could be a really big game for the Bills, because I feel like that division, despite them being the favorites, is going to be a lot more competitive this season. And, those big-time road games could be a true test of, are they going to be able to get over the hump and make it to the Super Bowl this season?
No, I completely agree with you, Garth. I think that division, if it weren't for the Jets rebuilding like they are right now, I think that division would be right there in competition as one of the best divisions in the NFL. Obviously, the Bills you mentioned. The Dolphins, I've said it how many times. I love that team and Brian Flores there. Went 10-6 last year. Still somehow missed the playoffs. And obviously, everyone knows what the moves the Patriots made in the offseason. So it's definitely going to be, a big game, I think, for the Bills. The Bucs, they have a little bit of easier time because the Panthers and Falcons are rebuilding. And the Saints, with a new quarterback there, they might go through a bit of a transition period as well. So, yeah, man, a lot of good games. I just made a massive list. One thing I love, Garth, Christmas football, man. We got Browns and the Packers, Colts at Cardinals, and Dolphins at Saints. I just always loved Christmas football, and we have the last Christmas games I remember were back in like 2011. It's just awesome to watch on that day. Obviously, I understand why it's not very common, but that's something I'm looking forward to as well.
Yeah, definitely Thanksgiving and now Christmas, as you said. No, 2 days that I personally like to sit down and just watch some good football games. And oddly enough, out of those games that you mentioned, 2 of those games sound like they could potentially be really, really good games. Especially was it Browns Packers you said there. That could be a really, really good matchup. I like both of those teams a lot this season. Again, as I said, should Aaron Rodgers stay in Green Bay, I expect them to contend. And obviously the Browns, top to bottom, with all the moves that they've been making, is one of the best rosters in football, one of the most complete teams. They don't really have any, huge holes across the board. So that could be a really, really good, exciting Christmas Day game. Not super, or rather actually being that late into the season, it could, have some playoff implications or seeding implications. So, there'll definitely be a lot to play for in that game. Dolphins, Colts, I believe was the other one there that you mentioned.
So Colts at Cardinals and then Dolphins at Saints.
Okay, Dolphins at Saints. I knew that Dolphins game jumped out at me. We're really excited to what we can see out of Jameis. Should he be able to play like he did that last season in Tampa and limit turnovers, the Saints, despite not having Drew Brees anymore, could still have a really potent offense. And obviously we know all the things that the Dolphins have been doing down there in Miami. So that, could be a kind of a shootout game in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, just a great lineup. I personally am not happy about us playing a London game against the freaking New York Jets, but, it is what it is. So, yeah, I mean, very interesting schedule. We open against the Eagles, which is an interesting game. Both teams kind of rebuilding. Neither are very good. So, it's going to be an exciting season, Garth. Obviously, it's well into the future, of course, still about, 4 months to go. But, the schedule, it's always very exciting when it gets released because you can look at all the matchups. And there's some great matchups, obviously, especially on prime time.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that as we get closer and closer, we're going to get even more and more excited for football. I want to go ahead and just say thank you guys who are tuning in. Henry, I am seeing your comments coming in. We're not ignoring you, man. I know you got some good NHL comments there. we're going to jump actually into that now. If you actually want to go ahead and fire up some stuff that you put on here, Noah, we'll go ahead and we'll jump right into NHL because I'm super, super excited to talk some hockey.
Well, Garth, I am too. And, obviously when the Stanley Cup playoffs come around, everyone's filling out their brackets and stuff. And, I just want to show you the bracket that I filled out real quick. And I think you're probably going to like it.
Most definitely. I mean, the teams themselves, they speak for themselves, but those two guys there with the trophy, I mean, that's a great, great bracket.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree completely, man. Those two, they're contenders. I can't see them. They're going to go far, man. I don't see them getting upset in their early rounds or anything like that. I think they're going to be great.
Yeah, potentially one hell of a Stanley Cup final matchup there. Two very high-powered teams would be going at it, looking to grab their first Stanley Cup.
I know, man, but are you ready to get into the actual stuff now?
Let's jump right into it, man. We're all here to talk NHL, guys, tonight with the playoffs being right around the corner.
Yeah, man, I got to showcase all the work I did. So, see, Garth, first matchup is the Boston Bruins going up against the Washington Capitals, Game 1, Saturday, May 15th. And, Garth, this is a matchup I'm very interested in. Obviously, both teams are very talented. Both have won Stanley Cups and all that. They've both been in the finals in recent years. But what I'm really going to be looking out for is stuff like this. Guys like Tom Wilson and Brad Marchand, these are obviously, two very talented players. But we both know they have that rough edge to them. They have that bit of a dirty edge, if you will. What are you expecting from, these two teams as they go up against each other?
Yeah, so, I kind of took the time to go over a lot of these teams that I don't regularly watch to be as prepared as possible tonight. One thing that really, really jumps out at me in this matchup is, first of all, that these two teams were tied on the season out of 8 matchups. They're 4-4 against one another. So, these are two teams that match up well against each other. Definitely, in my opinion, a series, even though I'm going to say I lean a little bit more towards the Boston Bruins, but I will say that I could definitely see either one of these teams pulling this off. One thing that really, really jumps out at me, Noah, in terms of offense is this trio of Marchand, Pastrnak, and Bergeron, man. They played 783 minutes together total on the season, and they have a 73.23 expected goals percentage. That's absolutely insane. Actually, one of the highest of any, let alone duo, but a trio in the NHL. That's one of the highest, that I found going through all the numbers and such. So, I'm looking to see what can the Capitals do against that top line. Are they going to be able to slow them down? Are they going to have a good floor check? What's going to happen there in goal? Because the last thing you want to do with the Bruins is let them get hot and let them score a lot of goals. I think what we saw last postseason is, when they did get eliminated by the Tampa Bay Lightning, they really had their struggles offensively. They kind of really kept them out of a rhythm, and, got guys like Marchand not playing their best, kind of got him frustrated.
Yeah, no, and I think you guys beat them in about 5 games or something. And that was a series, obviously a lot of people picked the Bruins. Or if they picked the Lightning, they were probably picking to go to 7 games. And then you guys obviously knocked them out in 5. But, I'm glad you mentioned the Washington goaltender situation because I'm going to get in that a little later as a reason I'm probably leaning the Bruins as well. But, you can see the stats at the bottom. And guys like Brad Marchand, Bergeron, they're right up there with the best in the NHL. Obviously, David Pastrnak, I think for his age, this guy could be an absolute superstar, potential Hall of Fame talent, in my opinion. But, like I said, Garth, these are two teams with a champion pedigree. Obviously, the Capitals, they won in 2018. The Bruins were in the finals 2019, obviously lost to the Blues. And the last time they actually played, Boston was trying to defend their title, and, Washington actually knocked them out. So, this is a series that, in my opinion, is one of the absolute closest on paper. It's pretty 50-50, in my opinion. What are you expecting from the Washington Capitals side of this, Garth? Obviously, they've got guys like Alex Ovechkin, Nicholas Backstrom. They're absolutely incredible. But, they still got great guys like John Carlson and Dmitry Orlov on the defense. What are you expecting from them in this series?
Yeah, so, two guys that you mentioned there, Noah, and I'm glad you did. Obviously, Ovechkin and Backstrom, when they're together on the ice, they've outscored team by 14 goals. So, obviously, that's a duo that you want to see on the ice a lot, and you want to see them, playing well. That's going to be a very, very big part in whether or not the Capitals, can win this series. And as you said there, goaltending. The Capitals are going to have the harder battle in that sense. because they are going up against, Tucker Rusk. So, they're going to have to put some points up on the board. If they're held scoreless or only 1 or 2 goals per game, I unfortunately don't see them winning if that's the case. I do know that Ovechkin has been a little bit banged up towards the end of the season, so that's definitely going to play a factor. Is he 100% or not? Because they're definitely going to need him to be at 100% if they're going to be able to win, this series.
Yeah, Garth, and we can get into the injuries real quick. I'm glad you actually mentioned that because obviously I also took the time to do this as well. And I'm looking at on the Boston side, they don't really have a lot of major injuries. Obviously, John Moore's out on IR, but he's kind of a top 6 defenseman. Zaboral, this isn't really a big loss either. I'm looking at Charlie Coyle and Andre Kasha now. Kasha out until May 19th. He's a decent, middle 6 type of forward, and I think Charlie Coyle is the same thing. But, for being this late in the season going into the playoffs, I think these are actually fairly respectable amount of injuries. It's not that big a deal. And then on the Washington side, I'm going to get in the goalie situation. Obviously, you can see Samsonov there with COVID-19, expected to be out until May 15th. Kuznetsov with the exact same thing. Michael Kipney and, TJ Oshie. TJ Oshie could be a big loss. But, I mean, going into the playoffs, Garth, I think these teams are actually pretty full strength right now.
Yeah, you just showed the names there and the specific injuries. There's not very many names on either side. And, for the most part, none of those injuries were severe injuries. They're just kind of nagging things that you can play through. You might not be at 100%, but definitely, you can play through. And a guy there that I'm glad that you mentioned, Noah, is Oshie, because I got a stat here that when Oshie and Ovechkin, have been on the power play together, they've combined for 22 power play goals, which is 3rd in the league, 24.8%. And they're actually going to be going up against the 2nd best penalty kill in the league. The Bruins sitting there at 86%. So that's definitely going to be one of, these matchups within the matchup itself that we're going to have to look out for and see which side can get the better of the other.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. And I think when I look at the forwards and defensemen, I think that these teams are very even. Where I think this series is decided is the goaltenders. Now, I looked this up. I made sure to get all the information right. Obviously, we know Tuukka Rask is the guy there in Boston, but like I said, with Samsonov out in COVID, they potentially have to start a rookie in Vitek Vanacek, who's he's played a little bit this season, Garth, but this is still a guy. He's very young. He's never played in the playoffs before. Obviously, like I said, there he hasn't officially named the starter, but from what I read, it sounds like this Vanacek rookie guy is expected to start over Craig Anderson, who's been in the league for about 15 years now. What do you think about it? A rookie goalie. He's had a respectable season, but he's never played in the playoffs, and he's going up against a guy in Tuukka Rask, who sure he's had his struggles in the playoffs, but he's reached the finals. He has plenty of experience. What are you looking at in this goalie matchup?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the fact that he does not have any playoff experience in Vanacek. And as we all know, other than Canada, because I don't believe they're allowed to yet at this point, but here in the States, these teams are going to have fans in the stands. I know a lot of teams are going to be somewhere around the 50% capacity. So obviously, it's not going to be the home ice that we're accustomed to where the arena is absolutely packed, going nuts. But, there's going to be a decent amount of people in there. They're going to be passionate for their teams. They're going to be fired up. And that, is certainly going to put some added pressure onto Vanacek, and we're going to have to see how he responds to that. Not only is he going to be going up against a very, a very opportunistic offensive line and the guys that we listed off in Marchand and Bergeron and Pasta there, he's going to be really tested now. Rask, I'm not so worried about. He's played 93 playoff games. He has that, experience, as you said. He's been here. He's been through this. He's reached the finals, as you said. And I think the biggest advantage is that he's coming into this series very, very rested. He really hasn't played a lot this season. He is healthy from what I've heard. He just hasn't played a lot this season, so he's going to be rested. I definitely got to go with a pretty big advantage in goaltending towards the Boston Bruins here, Noah.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. And I think the thing with Rask, like you said, is that, he has a great backup in Yaroslav Halak. This is a guy that's been a starter in the NHL for many years. Obviously, he broke out with the Canadiens in a playoff series that I actually think was against the Bruins, funnily enough. He was with the Blues for a while. So, Rask has that advantage as well going up against a rookie. Who are you picking, Garth, and how many games do you think it's going?
Yeah, so, I think it's going to be a close series, Noah. Like I said, I think these teams both match up pretty well. I think they're going to play each other tough. I got to go with the Bruins here. I think that they've got a really sour taste in their mouth from last season, the Lightning beating them in 5, other than one game where they looked really good and kind of got the best of Vasilevsky. They got, manhandled in that series. The Lightning had their way with them. I think they've got a lot of revenge that they want to seek, and they've got a big chip on their shoulder. As we saw, they're coming into this series relatively healthy. Should they have guys like Coyle at 100%, that's definitely going to help, with those second, third, and fourth lines. Goaltending, huge in playoffs, as we see. You cannot be having guys having breakdowns and letting up 5-6 goals. I got to go Bruins here. Again, I think it's going to be a pretty good series. I'm going to go something like Bruins in 5 to 6 games with Bruins.
Wow, that's obviously, big support for the Boston Bruins. And Garth, I think if the Washington Capitals goaltending situation was a little more clear, I would probably pick them in something like 7 games. But because obviously Vanacek is in for Samsonov, who hasn't played in the playoffs either, I got to give the edge to the Bruins here just because, they're a bit more experienced in goal. And I think, the forwards and defensemen are fairly equal. I don't think I'd go 5, though. I think I'd probably go 6. But yeah, I'm going Bruins as well here.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good series. I think they're going to be, close games, hard fought. I don't really see a lot of blowouts either way in the series. So even if the Bruins did win 4-1 or 4-2, like I said, I think it's just overall going to be a really good, hard fought series from both sides.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. And, this next series, Garth, it's one I can talk about a lot more because obviously it's very personal to me. We have the number 4 New York Islanders going up against the number 1 Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, Garth, I didn't expect us to win this division. I thought we'd maybe finish second or third, something like that. But we went on an absolute tear to finish the season, and we actually ended up winning the division. And we go up against the New York Islanders. And now, the one thing I hate about being a Panthers fan, Garth, a Penguins fan, is that our fans are kind of idiots sometimes. And, I've been seeing people kind of looking past the Islanders and saying, our real threat's Boston and all that. But I think that's pretty stupid because obviously, Garth, this is a team that made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. And they gave you a good run. I believe that series went to 6 games and you won the deciding game something like 2-1. But even more than that, the last time that these teams played, they actually swept us. And we only scored 6 goals in 4 games. So that was one of the most humiliating losses I've seen us have in a playoff series in a long time. You know the basics. Penguins high flying offense. The Islanders, they pride themselves on that hard checking. Defense is fundamentally sound. What do you see from this series here?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. No, the Isles are definitely a team that you can't overlook here. As you said, they play a very scrappy, physical style of defense. They take their opportunities on offense. They've got a guy that I personally really, really like. He's one of my favorite players in the league, and Matthew Barzal. And also, guys like Jordan Eberle. They're very opportunistic scorers. They might not put up crazy numbers every game, but, if they get hot, they can be very, very potent offensively. And, on the other side with your Penguins, they're a team that we're going to get into, rather similar to a team that we'll get into later tonight. And the Hurricanes, who, probably overachieved a little bit this season, and they've been one of the hottest teams, in the whole league. And as you said, have gone on an absolute tear leading up to postseason play and ended up winning their division. So as you said, 2 contrasting styles. You guys have that high flying, potent offense, whereas, the Isles are going to look to slow the game down. They're going to want to, try and get some power play advantage, get you guys in the penalty box. Control the ice, control the puck. So, it's going to be really cool to see this contrasting style of play. Are we going to see the potent offense, or are we going to see the physical, defense with some opportunistic play on the offensive side? Who are we going to see winning this? And, I'll make my prediction a little bit later on. But, this is a series that I'm personally really looking forward to now.
And Garth, I think the key for the Islanders is that they're a very balanced team, that they're not heavily offensive or defensive, but they can do a bit of both. Obviously, Matthew Barzal is their best player by far. I think, like you said, I think he's a fantastic player. But they still have, all-around solid players like Josh Bailey, Jordan Eberle. Nick Leddy is actually a really good defenseman. I think he's a bit overlooked. It says right there, 31 points as a defenseman is actually very good for this shortened season. And I think when you look at our team, I've told you a lot. I'm not sold on our defense, but our offense is absolutely fantastic. Obviously, Crosby leading the way there, leading all our stats. Malkin as well, Jake Gensel, Brian Rust. I think the key for us has been that guy right there scrolling towards the bottom there. Chris Letang has been absolutely fantastic this season. 45 points, and I believe it was a plus 19. I mean, like I told you, Garth, I'm not sold completely on our defense, but Chris Letang's having a great year. And, these other guys like Cody Cece and Brian Dumoulin, who, I've criticized in the past, they've actually, they've had a respectable year, but I'd still say our defense is probably our number one concern in this series.
Yeah, like I said, the Isles are not known for their offense, but they have a lot of guys who, should they get hot, they definitely can be a very threatening offensive team. Just looking at some more names here, they've got guys like Adam Pellick and Ryan Pollock, two guys that I personally really like. They provide some help in terms of scoring. They've got a 60% expected goal percentage when they're on the ice together. So, the Isles, the thing that I like about the Isles is they're not a very heavy top line team. They do have some guys, as I mentioned earlier, in that top line that are phenomenal, but, they have solid depth through, their second and third lines. They have guys that, can come in and provide, some much needed help later in the games. So I think really we're going to have to see the Isles second and third lines come up huge. Because if they're just very reliant on that first line, that's not going to be enough, in my opinion, to keep up with the scoring of the Penguins.
No, I definitely agree, and I think that's, obviously the Penguins' main strength is their, superstar talent up front. Crosby and Malkin, like I said, Gensel and Rust. I think, like you mentioned, the Islanders, they're not a team that's very stacked. I think Barzal's their best player, and they just have a lot of really good players beyond that. But, they want to roll all four lines, all the pairings and all that, but let's just go into their injuries real quick, Garth. Obviously, Johnny Boychuk, he basically retired. I don't even know why he's on here, to be honest, that terrible eye injury. But, kind of a similar thing. Now, I'm going to get into Varlamov in a little bit when we talk about the goalies. But, I mean, Zajac and Lee, Lee is a big loss. I think he's actually a really good player. But other than that, I mean, do you see anything here, Garth, that is really standing out to you? I don't.
No, not really. As you said, no, Boychuk's, pretty much retired. He wasn't going to be much of an impact for them. Other than some veteran leadership. And, Varlamov maybe, but I don't think that's anything serious. So it's nothing that really concerns me too much.
Yeah, I agree. And, the Pittsburgh side of it, Garth, I looked over this. Obviously I have a little bit more knowledge about the Penguins and how these players fit in. Casey DeSmith is our backup. So even if he was healthy, I think, Jari would be the guy getting the starts. The rest of these guys, obviously Malkin, we need him back. But I think unless he's like dead or anything and he's only day-to-day, he's going to play. And then Tanev and Rodriguez, they're just solid, bottom six players and all that. Matheson, a top six defenseman at best. I think we're pretty healthy here. Another thing I'm really concerned – I wouldn't say I'm really concerned, Garth, but another thing I want to keep an eye on is Tristan Jarry getting his first, playoff series start for the Penguins. Obviously, he's been here a few years, but when we made the playoffs, a few years in a row, Matt Murray was our starter, not Jarry. I'm very interested to see what he does. And like we mentioned there real quick, Varlamov, he's a fantastic goalie. You saw what he could do last year in the playoffs. He's day-to-day. Are we going to see, a rookie in Ilya Sorokin who, fine, like Vanacek earlier, he played well when he was in, but he doesn't have any playoff experience and all that. We could potentially see a very inexperienced goaltender battle in game one here.
Yeah, and, just backtracking real quickly, Noah, one thing that I did notice on the injuries, and I don't think it's a make-or-break player, but I will say that I think the Isles missing Anders Lee, that would be a guy that they would like to have. He was huge for them last postseason. He was involved in a lot of plays. But like I said, I think that's a make-or-break injury. I think that, they'll be fine without him. They would just like to have him, obviously, in the rotation. But, yeah, with goaltending, Noah, like you said, we saw what Varlamov could do last postseason. He had a really good postseason other than one or two games there where he actually had to get, pulled. But I think that was just an overall breakdown of the whole team. For your Penguins, what I'll say with Jarry is that if the Penguins can control the pace of the game, they can keep the puck out of their end a lot. That's going to make his life a lot easier when you're in your first series and you're not facing a ton of shots and being pressured all game long. I personally feel like that's really going to help prevent those, complete breakdowns where all of a sudden, you're questioning pulling a guy because he's letting so many shots go by. or close calls. So, I think that the Penguins just kind of want to keep, shots on goal limited. They want to play with the puck and keep it on, the pressure on the Isles as much as possible to help him out.
Yeah, absolutely, Garth. And I think, like I said, that's going to be a tough test for us because, I think our defense has done pretty well this year. But like I said, in the past, this made me a bit scared. Our offense is definitely our strength here. We've been over it all of it. Garth, who are you picking in this series?
Yeah, I got to go with the Penguins here, Noah. I think that you guys are just, you're on a tear. You're one of the hottest teams in hockey right now. I just like Sidney Crosby too much. And, just overall, I like a lot of guys on your team. I will say that the Isles, do have a little bit of an advantage maybe in the defensive aspect and, a slight advantage in goaltending, but I don't think that that's enough for them to overcome this series. I like you guys, much like the last series, I like you guys winning in 5 or 6 games here.
Yeah, and that's definitely an understandable pick. I'm still a bit, nervous, obviously, because the last time we played them, they actually swept us. I don't see that happen again. Like you said, we're very hot. Now, I do think we overachieved. I did not expect us to win the division at all, but, you got to watch out for red-hot teams and get in the playoffs, Garth. They can go on a run and do anything, but you said Penguins in 5 or 6. I'd probably go 6 or 7, honestly. I think if, Varlamov comes back really early and he plays well, I think he'd go to 7. But I'm going to assume that maybe he's a little bit nagged by his injury or something like that. And, I'm going to say Pittsburgh in 6. But, I'm not looking past them. I know a lot of Penguins fans are. I think those guys are idiots. This is a very, Barry Trotz, he's a Stanley Cup winning coach. That, that team is just so fundamentally and defensively sound. It's going to be a tough series, Garth. And speaking of tough series, we've talked about my team. We got to talk about your team. An interstate rivalry here between the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers. Now, Garth, I think this has the potential to be an absolutely fantastic series. Now, one thing I actually found very interesting when I was looking up and researching for this is that, obviously your title defense is starting and all that, but Florida actually went 5-2-1 against you guys in the regular season. A big advantage that I wasn't expecting. Especially because you guys, you started to lead the division early on. You actually beat them in a game where, they were about a game. They had a game in hand or whatever, or they had one more game than you, and it looked like you might take control of that division. But then they went on a tear. They got some big wins against you. But the key I'm looking at for this series, Garth, is that a lot of that was without Nikita Kucherov and Steven Stamkos. And we've been talking about this a lot. They're expected to return for Game 1. This is your team, Garth. This is one of your biggest rivals here in interstate rivalry. What are you expecting from this series? I think it's going to be an absolutely difficult series for both sides.
Yeah, obviously the matchup that, I know the most about. I followed, the most closely out of all these teams in the regular season. I've got quite a few things here to go over. Unfortunately, I'll start off by saying that our title defense run does not start off easy. The Florida Panthers are a very, very good team. And I picked them to do well. I thought we would finish above them and, probably have a little bit better of an overall record versus them. As you said, 5-2 advantage over us. I will say that Kuch and Stamkos coming back obviously is going to help us a lot. I got a stat here that Kuch hasn't played with Stamkos on the ice together in an NHL game in 14 months. That's kind of absolutely insane. And another thing here that, Kuch, if he is obviously 100%, he hasn't played in a while, so we're going to have to see how quickly, it takes him to get back to form. Unfortunately, it's very tough for him just to jump back in, especially in postseason play and be at his best form. But should he be able to play, near that or at that, that's going to be a huge help. I got a stat here for you, Noah, that Kuch in the top line paired with Palat and Point combined for 85 points last postseason. So obviously that's a very, very potent line that we want Kuch to be a big part of. They do really, really good on the power play, specifically Kucherov, as we saw all last postseason when he was in on that power play. The Tampa Bay Lightning, were very, very good in terms of scoring. And then on the other side of it, the Panthers come in riding a 7-game win streak. As you said, fantastic season for them. They've set records for point percentage, home record, and road record. And by the way, just to clarify, that is franchise records, not, overall NHL records. And then, Joel Quenneville, obviously a Coach of the Year candidate. He's had a fantastic season, there. And, this is I'll let you, add some opinion to this now, but this is just going to be a very, very tough matchup for both
Yeah,
of these teams.
I think the key thing is a key here, Garth. The coaches are absolutely top tier here. Obviously, John Cooper, he won it for you guys last year. But like you mentioned, Joel Quenneville, this is a guy that's won, I believe it was 3 Stanley Cups with the Chicago Blackhawks, and I think he won somewhere else. The team is slipping my mind, but this is a guy. He has all the playoff experience you could possibly want. He has a title-winning pedigree. He has great players and guys like Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberdeau, who I think are one of the 2 best. Not just talented kind of duo, but I think they're both very solid all-around players. Obviously, Barkov is a guy that's consistently near the top of the voting for the Selke. Huberdeau is a great playmaker. They had a guy in Mackenzie Weegar come out and have a career year despite playing 22 minutes. It's gonna be a tough series, Garth. I think that like you said, the Panthers probably they exceeded everybody's expectations. We'll see whether or not they overachieved by how they play in this series, but. When I look at you guys, Garth, and obviously, just from the outside looking in, those injuries to Kuch and Stamkos, they're not ideal. But you had a guy in Braden Point who was your leading point scorer, 23 goals and 48 points. Very solid player. Victor Hedman, we all know about him. I mean, just a fantastic player. 45 points as a defenseman. Honestly, I think he should have won the Norris last year. I don't know how he didn't win it. But the thing I think that separates you guys from other teams, and it's why you won it all last year, is your depth. You have the great, top tier talent, but then you have, guys like Andre Palat, Yanni Gord, Alex Killorn. I mean, these are all great players. Barclay Goodrow, your plus minus leader. What do you think, Garth? Do you think you guys you obviously have a good chance this series. What are your expectations for this postseason for the Lightning?
Yeah, if Kuch and Stamkos, I mean, specifically more so Kuch. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's injuries or age. I love Stamkos to death. I don't feel like at this point in his career he has a big of an impact as Kucherov has on the ice for our team in terms of scoring and offensive prowess. Obviously, I want him in the lineup playing his best, but I think that we really, really need Kucherov to be at his best all postseason. And if he can be, realistically, I don't see why we can't make it to the finals again. Obviously, it's going to be tough. I don't count on it happening, but we have the ability to make it there and hopefully win. But a couple of things that I want to point out here, Noah, that I had written down that I don't want to forget about. Some guys that you mentioned there, Barkov. He's one of the best two-way players in the league. 26 goals, 58 points on the season, and then 2 guys in Sam Bennett and Jonathan Huberdeau. The duo has a expected goal percentage of 73.62% and have outscored opponents when on the ice together 10-1. So, as much offensive firepower as we have, we kind of seem to have this plethora of guys who can score and be offensive impacts. The Panthers definitely don't lack in that department. And I feel like that's what makes this matchup so tough because the Panthers aren't one of these teams that are super, super reliant on just like 1 or 2 guys. And when they play really good, they can easily match us in terms of offense. Obviously my guy that I look to have potentially the biggest impact, 2 guys, really. Obviously Victor Hedman, his health is a little bit of a concern right now, Noah. He was, banged up and showing that he was banged up to end the season. His production went down. I'm hoping that he is 100%. Because we're really, really going to need him. And then Vasilevsky, I know right now he's a lot of guys picked to win the Vezina. 31 wins on the season, 2.21 goals allowed, and a 925 save percentage. We really, really need him, to be shut down, locked down in goal for us this series if we're going to have a good shot at winning.
Absolutely, and we'll get into the goalies in a minute. Mike Aldridge here is obviously a big Bolts fan like you. He says, expectations are to repeat and nothing less. Honestly, it would be a major underachievement if this core only wins 1 cup. And, I've got to agree with him here, Garth. Obviously, we mentioned all the guys, Point, Stamkos, Kucherov, Hedman, Vasilevsky, who I'm a big fan of as well. I know, he's had a fantastic year. Hypothetical question here, Garth, just way out here. How many cups would you be happy with this core winning? Are you looking at 2 or 3 or, maybe even more? I mean, this core is so young. It can be together for, well over another decade, I think.
Yeah, I would be very, very happy with 2 to 3. As I say, the Stanley Cup, in my opinion, is probably the hardest championship to win in professional sports. So definitely I'm very happy with one. I don't want to sound ungrateful by any means. Two, I would be, over the top excited. Three, I definitely don't count on it. I don't really expect three out of them, but, obviously I really would like three. So hopefully 1 to 2 more. But, at least we can say that we've won one. One thing that does worry me is, come time for the Kraken to draft, who are we going to lose? But that's, for later on after the season to get into that. But one thing I want to mention here, Noah, is this series actually reminds me a lot of the past 2 seasons when we've played the Columbus Blue Jackets, because when these two teams meet, it is a very, very physical, hard-hitting matchup. I got a stat here that the last time they faced off, they had a total of 154 penalty minutes. So these guys, and obviously both being in the state of Florida, the Sunshine State Showdown, this is going to be a hard-hitting, penalty minute series.
Yeah, I agree with you, Garth. I'm just looking over the Panthers roster real quick. Mackenzie Weegar, who I mentioned, 118 hits. Ratko Gudas, 250 hits in only 54 games. I mean, this is a guy, obviously he played for the Lightning years ago, probably before you started watching hockey, but this is a guy, he loves to lay the wood. They got a guy in Carter Verhaeghe, who you should probably remember was on your team last year. He scored 36 points in 43. Absolutely fantastic acquisition for them. Anthony Duclair, 32 points, a plus 27. I mean, this is a really tough series, Garth. Let's just go over the injuries real quick before we make our predictions. Obviously, Huberdeau day to day. Aaron Ekblad is a guy, Garth, and, he's obviously on IR. He's going to miss the playoffs. I think he's underachieved as a number one pick. I'm not saying he's a garbage player. I think he is a good player, but, the fact he was out the entire year, and then a guy like Mackenzie Weegar comes in, who, no disrespect, but he's barely played his entire career. He comes in, has a career year. You got to be feeling for Aaron Ekblad right now. He's been a bit injury prone. I think he's underachieved a bit as a number one pick. And obviously Brandon Montour is a decent defenseman as well, but not too bad on the injury front here, Garth.
Yeah, most definitely. Nothing really that jumps out at me. That if I were a Panther fan would worry me too much. I think Huberdeau is going to play, and be good for them all series.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And, I'll just put up these injuries here. Now, this is your team, Garth. I want you to go through this, as detailed as possible. You've obviously mentioned Stamkos and Kucherov. What are you hearing with Victor Hedman here and then guys like Andre Platt, Barclay Goodrow? How are they feeling right here?
Right. So, as I mentioned there, Hedman is a little bit concerning because his production did drastically fall off towards the end of the season. So, I know that's got a lot of fellow Lightning fans a little bit worried. Because if he can't play at his best, that's obviously going to make, our life a lot harder. He just does so much for this team, not only in terms of defense, but, he just, for how big he is, Noah, he moves so well on the ice. He's a huge facilitator of this offense and, just probably our best offensive defensive men. And then guys like Barclay Goodrow, he's one of those third line guys that is scrappy. He really provided that edge last postseason that we lacked and was a huge help in towards winning that Stanley Cup finals. So we're going to need him to be at his best should he play. And then obviously Palat, out of all these guys, that's probably the one that worries me the least because, his, I think, is just very minor, a little bit nagging injury. I don't expect him to miss any time. And I think that he'll probably be at or near 100% and playing his best for us.
And I think the key for you guys, Garth, and it's something you guys probably lacked a few years ago when you underachieved in the playoffs, that defense, I mean, obviously Victor Hedman, but Mikhail Sergachev, Eric Chernak, guys like this, I mean, it's just a really solid defense all around. Now, I want to get your take on, the guys behind the defenders, the goalies. Obviously, both of them are Russian. Andrei Vasilevsky, I'm a big fan of him. I think he had a great year. Obviously, he got that playoff experience from winning the Cup last year. I thought he was really good in the playoffs last year. On the other side, Garth, it's kind of a tale of two cities here because, Sergei Bobrovsky, I love Sergei Bobrovsky, but he's a guy that has always struggled in the playoffs. I looked up his stats for the playoffs. His regular season stats this year weren't great, but his playoff stats, Garth, he gives up well over 3 goals a game. I believe his save percentage was only .908 or something like that. He's really struggled. What are you looking at here, Garth? A struggling veteran here in Bobrovsky and, kind of a breakthrough sensation in Andrei Vasilevsky the past few years.
Yeah, we absolutely got to take advantage of that goaltending situation there that they have. I feel like if we can get in the power play a lot, we can just, control the puck, put a lot of pressure on their goalies. That's going to be a huge, huge benefit for me, because I think this is a series that's, I'll get into my pick here in a little bit, but I think for sure this is a series that goes 6 or 7 games. It's really going to take a toll on the goaltenders. And obviously I'm pretty sure everybody would agree that we would give the advantage goaltending to the Lightning with how good Vasilevsky is. That's just one of the matchups within the game that the Lightning have to make the most of. I think that if we played to our best ability offensively, this is something that we can really, really exploit, and we can potentially have, one of those situations where they have a meltdown and, the coaches are swapping between goalies and having to pull them mid-game. And I tell you what, from my short experience watching playoff hockey, when you have to do that as a coach, that takes a huge toll on goalies. It really hits their confidence hard, and, it just makes winning games a lot harder.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around Bobrovsky here. And, obviously, like we said, they went 5-2-1 against you in the regular season. They did finish above you in the division, which I don't think anyone really expected. I know when we did the preview show with Brian, months ago now, he said you guys should probably run away with that division. Probably underachieved a bit. You finished third, but like we said, a lot of injuries. The Panthers had the season of their dreams, and yet they were only 5 points ahead of you. So, with you guys getting back relatively healthy against a really good team, what is your, unbiased prediction for this series here?
Yeah, like I said, no, this is a game, or rather a series that I for sure see going 6 or 7 games. They're going to play us extremely tough. We're going to have our work cut out for us. My biggest what if for this series is, what kind of impact can Kuch and Stamkos have? I'm really worried that we're going to see Stamkos come back and he's going to have another injury or barely be playing at all. And obviously that doesn't really help us at all. And obviously we need Kuch to be 100%. If Kuch is 100% and can get back to form, I see us winning in 6 or 7. If both of these guys are, limited in minutes, they're not really playing their best, I could definitely see the Panthers pulling this off. Overall, there's a lot of good matchups within the game. But I really think that Kuch and Stamkos is going to be the deciding factor for us. We need one of the two to be 100% and be an impact player for us.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is, other than Washington and Boston, I think this is probably the closest matchup on paper, in my opinion. Obviously there's the rivalry there, but, both very good teams. I think, like I said, the Panthers probably overachieved a bit, and you guys probably underachieved a bit because of injuries. I'm going to be honest, Garth, I think this series is probably going to 7 games, but I will probably pick you guys. I've said for how long I expect you guys to repeat and all that. And, I'm not going to go away from that just because you guys had a couple of injuries. But, funnily enough, Garth, a couple Southern teams here. We got to get into the next matchup here. 2 more Southern teams here now. The Nashville Predators and the Carolina Hurricanes. Number 4 Nashville against number 1 Carolina. Obviously, we see guys like Matt Duchene and Dougie Hamilton in the picture here. Now, Garth, I'm glad you mentioned it with Pittsburgh, a hot team. Nashville, they snuck in the playoffs with 64 points, but they were 7-2-1 in their last 10. And, it looked for a while there that Dallas was going to make it in over them, but they sneak in. And, both teams, not a lot of success. The Preds are trying to win their first title. Obviously, they made the finals in 2017. Lost to my Pittsburgh Penguins, of course. And then the Canes, they won in 2006. Been a bit of a drought. I believe they made the ECF, a few years ago against the Bruins, but I think they got swept in that series. So they're hungry to do something here, Garth. What are you seeing from this series?
Yeah, not only were they 7-2-1 in their last 10 now, but they're 19-7-1 since March 15th. So as you said, this was a team that we didn't really expect to make it in. We thought somebody like the Stars would get in above them, who, vastly underachieved this season after making it to Stanley Cup Finals. I think injuries and COVID kind of got the best of them and really derailed them this season. But yeah, this is another series very similar to your Penguins and Isles. We kind of have 2 very contrasting styles of play. The Hurricanes, red hot, just like your Penguins. Very, very, very potent offensive team. I got some numbers here. They're just very deep offensively. There's a ton of guys on this team that can score. One guy that really jumps out is Sebastian Aho, leads the way, 57 points. But they've got 4 other guys that had 40-plus points on this team now. Teuvo Teravainen, he's back for them, 3 goals in the past 5. They had 6 players outside of their top line that had double-digit goals. Like, this is a team that, every single line can punish you. Every single line can put up goals. And as good as this Predators defense is, it's going to be a tough test for them. They're really going to bank on their goalie playing well. And they've got to turn this into a backyard brawl. They've got to slow it down. They've got to try and take it to the Hurricanes defensively, be up in penalty minutes, get on the power play. They just need a lot of things to go their way, in my opinion. And just to add to it, the Hurricanes were 6 of 8 against the Predators in the regular season.
Yeah, absolutely, Garth. And, like you said, first of all, Dallas, did not even make the playoffs after making the finals. That's just terrible for them. But Nashville sneaks in over them now. As long as I've watched Nashville, Garth, they're always a team, they've never had elite forwards. They're a team that always has, decent forwards all around, but there's no superstars. That's kind of what I see here. Obviously, Kyle Yarncroc and Mikael Granlund, their goal-leading scorers with only 13. I think their best player by far is Roman Josi. Now, obviously, I mentioned Victor Hedman didn't win the Norris last year. That's because Roman Josi won it. I think he's a fantastic player, 33 points as a defenseman. Their top leading scorer overall, which for defensemen isn't that common. Matthias Ekholm a plus 19 as well. They obviously still have guys on the defense like Ryan Ellis and Dante Fabro. But I think, like you said, a guy like Sebastian Aho is actually absolutely fantastic. Point per game player, plus 16. The guys you mentioned with more than 40 points, Vincent Trocheck, Andrei Svechnikov, Dougie Hamilton, who's a defenseman, which is really impressive to have that many points, Martin Netchus as well, 41 points, and a plus 25. Like you said, obviously they finished top of this division. It's not going to be easy, Garth. Never count out a hot team like the Predators, but the Panthers, they just had a great season, Garth. What can you say about how great they were this year?
Yeah, they just, as I said, I can't say enough about how good this offense is. And they play fairly good defense too. They don't, they're not great in the defensive department, but they definitely aren't terrible. There's a guy on the other side in the Predators, UC Saros, who, watching a lot of stuff, getting some opinions, a lot of guys are saying that one of the only reason that the Panthers did make their way into the playoffs is because of how phenomenal he played. He had a slow start to the season, but then he kind of really took off. 2.28 goals against and a save percent of .927. So, this is a guy who's going to be really, really huge in this matchup. He's going to be tasked with a really big workload because he's going to be facing a lot of shots on goal, in my opinion. He's going to be put into a lot of tough situations where he's going to have to come up big. If he can play really, really well, Noah, if he can limit how many goals, because I think he's going to be facing a lot of shots. But if he can limit how many of those actually go in the net, the Predators can definitely make this a series. They play very, very good defense. So, that's really my biggest focus is obviously the Hurricanes are going to play well offensively. They're going to get a lot of shots on goal. They're probably going to keep the puck down towards that end of the ice a lot in these games. But what can UC Saros do? Is he going to give up a lot of goals, or is he kind of going to anchor that team and, help them steal a few games and potentially make it a series?
And I think the key here, Garth, with the goalies, they're both very young guys. Obviously, UC Saros, like you mentioned, had a phenomenal year, .927 save percentage, 2.28 goals against average. But, the guy there for a long time has obviously been Pekka Rinne. Obviously he's regressed a lot. Potentially might be leaving. UC Saros has to take over that, mantle. And on the other side, Alex Nedeljkovic is the guy that I'm seeing is probably most likely to start. He's a rookie as well. He's a contender for the Calder Trophy, which is the top rookie. And, I was looking over this, Garth. The Carolina goaltender situation is really weird. I think to start the year, Peter Mrazek was their guy there, but he got hurt, and then obviously James Reimer played a bit, but I think he's more of a backup. Towards the end of the season, what I saw was Nedeljkovic was starting a lot of these games as a rookie, and once again we come to another case. I don't think I've ever seen this so much, where so many rookie goalies could potentially be playing in the postseason. This has been interesting, Garth. A lot of two teams right here with, inexperienced goalies. I think UC Saros is going to have a bit of a tougher time, like you said, because, that Hurricanes offense is just, it's really good from top to bottom.
Yeah, like I said, no, he's going to be faced with a lot of shots on goal. It's going to come down to how many of those goals actually, or shots rather, make it in the net or not. And I think that the Predators, on the other hand, have to take advantage of the goaltending situation that they're going to be up against. As you said, it seems like pretty much every team, with the exception of one or two, have very inexperienced goalies who are going to be heavily tested, kind of like Carter Hart was last postseason. How many of these guys are going to be able to step up to the plate and come up big for their teams? And, as I mentioned earlier, there is going to be fans, right around 50% capacity. So there is going to be some crowd noise. They're definitely, going to have somewhat of an impact on these games. So, who wins the goaltending battle is probably going to be a very, very large part of who wins this series.
Yeah, I agree. And, I'm glad you mentioned the fans, Garth, because, I was on the Hurricanes website a bit earlier today doing some last-minute research. They're estimating there's going to be about 10 to 12,000 fans for this series for them. So that could be a key factor. But obviously, hot team. It's going to be very interesting. Let's just go over the injuries real quick. For Nashville, Victor Arvidsson day-to-day. He's kind of, a middle six forward here. Mark Borowiecki is, he's a depth defenseman. Lucas Spiza, kind of the same thing. I'm not seeing anything here that would really impact the Predators a lot, Garth. Now, when we look at the Hurricanes, let's just go over it real quick. Obviously, Brock again, he's another depth guy. Cedric Paquette, now you know him very well, obviously, a former Lightning player, kind of a bottom six guy, but he's a very solid all-around player, don't you think, Garth?
Yeah, and, I think his biggest strength is actually in the penalty kill. He's the guy who puts his body on the line and can really, really help in defending that power play. So that potentially, could be a little bit of a larger impact injury for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's the first team we've probably looked at, Garth, where I can look at this, list of injuries and say, man, there's some good players on here. Luckily, they're all day-to-day, but, Jordan Staal, obviously I know him very well, used to be a Penguin. Really solid third-line center right here. 3 defensemen in Brett Pesce, Jacob Slavin, obviously Dougie Hamilton was their leading scorer at defenseman. 3 really good players here. Svechnikov was, scored 42 points like you mentioned. There's some good names on here, Garth. The key thing for it, all these guys are pretty much day-to-day. So that is huge for the Hurricanes right there.
Yeah, and, I think that we kind of have two opposites here. Carolina's a little bit more banged up, a little bit more notable guys injured on their side, but due to how great of depth they have, it might not have the biggest of impacts. And on the other hand, the Predators just, they're really, really healthy coming into this matchup, and that's going to be key for them. It's going to help separate a little bit of that, gap that they have to make up for in this matchup.
Absolutely, Garth. And before we get into our predictions, I mentioned him a little earlier. We got to give a shout out to this guy right here, Pekka Rinne. Garth, I know you haven't been watching, you've been watching the NHL for about 2.5 years. I've been watching this guy, pretty much my entire life. He's played as long as I can remember. What a legend Pekka Rinne is. To get a 30-save shutout against the Hurricanes in the season finale, they beat him 5-0. I've been hearing a lot about this, Garth. It could potentially be his final game here. We mentioned UC Saros probably taking over for the playoffs. 369 career wins, 60 shutouts. Solid goals against average save percentage. Won a Vezina in 2018. If this is the way he goes out from the Predators, Garth, what a way to go out, honestly.
Yeah, hats off to this guy. As you said, unfortunately, I didn't get to, watch and appreciate him for the entirety of his career. But I think the numbers speak for themselves. And just to be a longtime starter in the NHL as a goalie is very tough. Goalie is probably one of the easier jobs to lose in this league. So just hats off to this guy. And like you said, if that was the last game that he plays there in Nashville, you couldn't go out a better way.
And as you can see right here, Garth, this is a picture from the finals when they played us, obviously. These are the kind of saves this guy that can make now. Obviously, unfortunately for him, the key thing about him is he never won a Stanley Cup. Obviously, he made it to the finals here. He actually had a bit of a shaky series, but still, he made a save like this in Game 3, I believe it was, when they were down 2-0. Literally saved them the game, and they got back in that series. This is what a guy like him can do now. The interesting thing is he going to make the Hall of Fame? I don't know. I was looking it up a week ago. His stats, the kind of top 20, 25-ish range, it's going to be very iffy for me to see if he can do it. But, either way, in my opinion, he's the best Predator there's ever been by far. I think it's going to be quite a while before someone takes that mantle from him. But, just hats off to him. What a career. What are your predictions here, Garth? A red-hot Predators team, really solid Hurricanes team. 2 inexperienced goalies. Who are you taking here?
Yeah, I got to go Hurricanes for the fact that the Predators, just need a lot more to go their way. They need to have some luck on their side. They need to be much more opportunistic than the Hurricanes. I feel like the Hurricanes definitely have a lot more room for error. I got to go Hurricanes here. Probably, I want to see the Predators make this a series now really badly. I don't like blowouts in hockey. I like these really close, hard-fought games. But if the Panthers don't bring their best game, I could definitely see this being won, something like 4-1 in 5 games.
Yeah, Garth, unfortunately, like you said, the Predators are red hot, but the Hurricanes just had such a great season. I really can't pick against them. Now, the only thing I can see that could potentially work in Nashville's favor is, like I said, they do have a good bit of injuries here. Maybe some of these guys come back a little slower. They're still a little banged up because there are some good players on here, but I have to agree with you here. I'm probably going to go the Hurricanes. If I'm being generous, I'll probably say, Nashville, UC Saros could have some really good games. I think they can push it to 6, potentially 5 games, but, I think they might. I think UC Stars might steal a few games to where they get into overtime, but then the Hurricanes' talent kind of takes over and they still win the game. So, I'd say probably Hurricanes in 6. But, these matchups, Garth, are absolutely incredible. And we have another one right here in the Minnesota Wild and the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, I don't know about you, Garth, but I was really surprised with the Wild here. Now, they made the play-in run last year. They lost in 4 games to the Canucks, who didn't even make the playoffs this year. I was really not expecting them to be this good. They didn't just make the playoffs. They made it easily with a 35-16-5 record. Now, Vegas also comes in a 7-3 run, and they want to get a Stanley Cup, Garth. That team, they got a lot of great players in their expansion draft and all that. They came up short to Washington, 3 years ago now. What are you seeing from this series, Garth? A bit of a surprising team and a team that's consistently been in the playoffs for a few years now.
Yeah, so maybe to much people's surprise, the Minnesota Wild were actually 5-3 on the season against the Vegas Knights. So, they definitely match up very well. It seems like the West is absolutely loaded this year between the teams that we thought that were going to be good and the teams that have overachieved out there. I'm not a fan of the Golden Knights at all. So I'm definitely rooting for the Wild here in this one, Noah. But I feel like this is a series that potentially could be one of the better ones, one of the closer ones. I think that this is going to be a really, really good series. And the Knights, like I said, no, I'm not a fan of the Knights. But, man, have they been good. Somewhere here, I got some stats for you. They've got, obviously they haven't been in the league that long, so, there isn't a whole lot of seasons to compare to, but they did set their franchise records for best winning percentage, points for percentage, offense and total offense and defense, penalty kill in their franchise history. So, they're playing very, very well. And, one thing that I heard mentioned a lot is a lot of guys, lately seem to kind of flurry in the playoffs. He's a potential guy that could be really, really huge for them as he is that experienced guy. I think just his name alone speaks enough. This is a series that I'm obviously just, really excited to see, Noah.
I agree, Garth. And like you said, I'm not a big fan of the Golden Knights, but I'm glad you mentioned Fleury because I'm sure you can tell I absolutely love that guy. But we'll get into the goalies a bit later. I think, like you said, this Knights team is just really solid all around. Max Pacioretty, he's just been a pure sniper his whole career. 24 goals this season. Mark Stone, their leading scorer, with 61. Shea Theodore, Garth, is a defenseman I really like. 42 points plus 28. I've just always really liked him, even when he was back on the Ducks. But even then, you got guys like Jonathan Marchessault plus 19, William Karlsson plus 19, Alex Tuck plus 16, Alec Martinez plus 26. This is just a really solid team, Garth, from top to bottom. But on the other side, like I said, the Wild kind of surprised this season. And I think a big reason for that is that they got a nice rookie injection here in Kirill Kaprizov. Now, he's a very interesting player, Garth. 51 points in 55 games as a rookie. He's the guy that's kind of the leading favorite to win the Calder Trophy as the top rookie. There's a couple other guys, Jason Robertson from the Dallas Stars, Igor Shesterkin from Brian's New York Rangers, and Nedeljkovic from the Hurricanes, who we mentioned earlier. But, the injection this guy has given to his team as a rookie, Garth. He took a team that barely made it into the playoff run and got quickly bounced last year to winning 35 games and, finishing comfortably as the number 3 seed in that division. What can you say about the impact a rookie player like this can have on a team?
Yeah, as you said, it's been a huge help for them. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I actually believe that he's probably been their best in terms of offense through the entire team. So obviously that's going to be huge. The Wild, out of the two, have the less potent offense, so they're going to be looking for big contributions from him. They don't really have the much prowess in defensive scoring as the Vegas Knights might have. But speaking of their defense, really deep in terms of defensive men. A lot of guys that can play really well and have an impact for them. And I think that's going to be something that's going to have to come up huge for them. They're going to have to slow down this Vegas Knights scoring, and they're going to have to make their life a lot easier on their goalie. Which, like you said, we'll get into the goaltending a little bit later, but that defense is going to be a huge factor in this game.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. It's a solid defense. Carson Sassy plus 22. My guy Ian Cole, another forward Penguin, plus 21 on the season. Jared Spurgeon was their leading scorer at defense, 25 points. But like you said, I think their best player by far is Kaprizov, the rookie, 27 goals and 51 points. Jordan Greenway had a solid season. Their leading assist man with 26. He had 32 points overall, plus 5, 87 hits. This team, Garth, obviously they have the skill, but you have guys like Joel Eriksson, 105 hits, Marcus Foligno, 109 hits as well, 37 blocks for Eriksson, 17 for Foligno. I mean, these are two guys that are defensively sound, and when you're playing a team with the talent that Vegas has, you need guys like this that are really solid defensively.
Yeah, and like I said, this defense for the Wild is going to have to come up huge. They're going to have to make life a lot easier on their goaltender. As I said, they're going to have to give their offense, a lot more possessions, a lot more chances for shots on goal. Because if they don't play well, the Knights are going to take advantage, and they could potentially, put up a lot of goals on these guys. And I think that this is going to be a very physical series. I like the fact that we have a lot of these, teams within the same division facing off against each other who just so happen to also, have at least somewhat of a rivalry. I think that makes the games all the much better. So overall, I'm just going to be looking for a very, very physical, hard-hitting matchup where both defenses can have a very, very big impact on this game, or the series rather, and how the games turn out.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. And before we get in the goalies and our predictions real quick, let's just go through the injuries like always. For Vegas, Alex Tuch, this is a really good player here, middle six player. I believe he had about 35 points this year. Patrick Brown, a depth forward. Alec Martinez, really good as well. Like I said, I think he was like a plus 26. Ryan Reeves, an absolute grinder. This is a guy that always fights, always hits. Pacioretty, their leading goal scorer. Peyton Krebs, who's a young guy, I believe, at Nosek, another depth guy. So, I mean, there's some key losses here, Garth. Like I said, Tuch, really good player. Alec Martinez, one of their top defensemen, a grinder. Max Pacioretty, their best sniper. They've got some names on here, but another key thing, like we've seen a lot of teams, most of these injuries, they're pretty good, Garth. They're not severe long injuries.
Right. And, potentially this actually could be one of the most impactful, because there's a lot of guys here that I feel like if they're nowhere near 100% actually might play a big impact in the series. But if it's just, minor lingering injuries, then, I really wouldn't put too much into that.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. And let's go over to the Minnesota side. Same thing again here, kind of some minor injuries. Kaprizov, they cannot, he's their key player, like we said. He hopefully gets back. But the key thing here, Garth, they just kind of rested some players. I don't even know why they honestly bothered to put these guys on the injury report. Brodin, Kaprizov, Zuccarello is a really good player as well. Kevin Fiala, same thing. Spurgeon, all resting. Andrew Hammond, literally just a reserve goalie. I mean, perfect bill of health for the Wild, Garth. But like I said, why do they put these guys on the injury list if they're just getting rested? That's not an injury.
Yeah, it is kind of a strange thing there because, like you said, obviously they're not injured. They're just resting them for sake of playoffs. But, much like the Panthers, the Wild are heading into this with a clean slate in the injury department. It could be a huge boost for them because if some of these Golden Knight players are seriously banged up, they're missing, time, these impact players, that could really help even the odds for the Wild. Because like I said, I do expect this to be a very hard physical series. So if you have guys who are already banged up and they're impact players and they're out there getting punished on the ice, that obviously is not going to be helping them get through these injuries and being at 100%. So, definitely advantage Minnesota Wild in the injury department.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just a really smart move for them to kind of rest all their key guys when they didn't really have anything to gain but a lot to lose. Um, Now let's just wrap it up real quick here with the goalies. Obviously, you mentioned Marc-Andre Fleury, Penguins legend, as I wrote there. I absolutely love this guy, and he was great this season. You know, objectively speaking, 1.98 goals against average. That's a sign of a really good defense. But also, you know, a 928 save percentage, a really good goalie here, Garth. And like you said, a ton of playoff experience. Obviously, won 3 Stanley Cups. He was absolutely crucial when they won in 2009 against the Red Wings. For 2016 and 17, he didn't play as much. He kind of split with Matt Murray, but he still had some key games there, Garth. You know, a lot of people think that that was just, you know, Matt Murray all the way through. That's not true at all, especially in the second one, I'd say. You know, Marc-Andre Fleury was a key contributor to us getting those Stanley Cups. And, you know, he's going up against a guy in Cam Talbot who's just kind of been a respectable, you know, starter goalie Garth. He's made the playoffs a few times with some teams that were unfortunately less than ideal, but he still looked pretty good in that series, Garth. So I say this is probably one of the strongest goalie matchups we've had so far.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that, you know, what really helps Vegas here is obviously Marc-Andre Fleury. But the fact that should he need some rest, should he struggle a little bit, they've got a guy in Robin Lehner behind him who, you know, I wouldn't say is a top-tier goal by any means, but he's definitely capable of coming in and, you know, playing well enough should he need to. You know, they've kind of got a pretty solid goalie tandem there, you know, who random fact here, count 12 million against the cap this season. So should he come in, you know, they're going to be expecting him to play well. You know, and then like you said, on the wild side, Cam Talbot, not a top goalie in the league, but he's not terrible by any means. You know, I expect him to be pretty solid, you know, in this series, and he's probably going to be facing a lot of shots, much like the Panthers. So, you know, they're going to need the best out of him this series, most definitely.
Yeah, I agree. It's a very interesting matchup. You know, like I said, the Wild I think exceeded everybody's expectations because they got Kaprizov and he was fantastic. Vegas just a really solid team, top to bottom. Who are you? I think I know who you're picking in this series, Garth. But how many games do you have it going to?
Yeah, I got to go Vegas here. As much as I would like to see the Wild win this series, I got to go Vegas. I'm going to go 6 games. I think the Wild are going to pull off some wins. They're going to make games close. I don't really see them getting blown out every single game. But I just, you know, I think that the Vegas have too much depth top to bottom. They have defensive men that are just, you know, so good offensively. I think that they just, you know, have a slight advantage across the board in most aspects, and they're going to be able to pull this series off.
Yeah, I'm right with you, Garth. In fact, I think I'm probably going to go Vegas in 6 as well. I just think, you know, fair play to the Wild. Excuse me, they had a fantastic season. I think Kaprizov is going to be a great star for them for years to come. But the Vegas Golden Knights, you know, like you said, I don't like them, but they're just so good from top to bottom. My guy Marc-Andre Fleury as well. I'm probably going to pick him to win the series, but it's not going to be easy, Garth. And speaking of a series that has the potential to be really good here, we have the St. Louis Blues going up against the Colorado Avalanche. Now, I love this matchup, Garth. Obviously, the Blues, you know, they might have underachieved a bit from what people expected, but they still made it in. Colorado Avalanche won the President's Trophy as the top regular season team in the league. And this is very interesting because, as I say here, you know, this is a team that just won the title, you know, 2 years ago against the Bruins. Obviously, going up against the President's Trophy winners, who went 8-2 in their last 10 and won 5 straight games to finish with 82 points, a league high. This is a series, Garth. I think a lot of people are kind of looking past the St. Louis Blues here. And, you know, let's just bring up a comment from a long time ago from Henry. The first time the Avs won the President's Trophy was 1996-97, where they lost in the Western Conference Final. 2000-2001 Stanley Cup champs. History could repeat itself this season. And I don't disagree with Henry here, but I think a lot of people are really looking past the St. Louis Blues in this series, Garth. I think a lot of people are, you know, they see their number 4, and the Avalanche obviously had a great season. But, you know, this is a team with a championship pedigree, you know, only 2 seasons ago. What are you expecting from the Blues in this series, Garth? Because I think they're going to make it tougher than people think.
Yeah, and I do as well. No, I'll start off, you know, touching on the Avalanche real quickly. You know, I think that there's just a lot of stuff on paper that jumps out at people, and, you know, that's why they're going with the Avalanche. As you said, they did win the President's Trophy, so they will have home ice throughout. 16-0-1 in their last 17 home games. That's absolutely insane. I don't know what they were at for regular season crowd capacity, but I do remember seeing something for the postseason. They'll be in that 40 to 50% range. So they're definitely going to be, you know, looking to take full advantage of that absolutely insane home record. You And I think that paired with the fact that they were top 3 in the league for goals for and goals allowed, there's just some stuff on paper that really jumps out. And I think that's why a lot of, say Vegas odds maker and analysts kind of want to give them the shoe in to win this series. But, as you said, the St. Louis Blues are going to make this series a lot tougher than people think. They were Stanley Cup champions just 2 seasons ago. They have some pretty good lines that, Ryan O'Reilly, David Perron, Zach Sanford, in that top line. I don't see, as good as the Avalanche are, Noah, I just don't see this being like a 4-0 absolute blowout series.
I agree, Garth. I mean, like I said, they only won the Stanley Cup 2 years ago. Sure, they had a bit of a down year this year, maybe, but David Perron's still there, the leading scorer with 58. Ryan O'Reilly, Garth, 24 goals, leading goal scorer, a plus 26. He's one of the best defensive centers in the entire league. And if we go back to that picture real quick, I think these two guys are the keys here. Ryan O'Reilly and Nathan MacKinnon, just absolutely fantastic players here at the center position. Whoever gets the better of the other in this series, I think is going to have a massive advantage. But, I mean, like you said, Perron, O'Reilly, Mike Hoffman as well, 36 points. Braden Shin is a really solid two-way forward. And obviously, we got to remember, in the offseason, they signed Torrey Krug to that massive 7-year, $45.5 million contract. Year number 1, 32 points, the leading scorer at the defense. So, I mean, they have some solid players, Garth. It's not like, they just snuck in the playoffs. They have no one who can play. They got some good players here.
Yeah, and we'll get into the goaltending as well, but that's something that, I'll say they have the advantage in, but we'll get there when we get there. One other guy that jumps out at me in this matchup is Cale Makar. He's absolutely fantastic two-way player. He actually was the only NHL defenseman who averaged a point per game. So, that's going to be a guy that they're going to be looking to hold in check. And just as you said, there's just too many guys on the St. Louis Blues team that can be big contributing factors, impact players, where I see them just getting blown out. No, I think that this is going to be a really, really good series. And honestly, if the Avalanche don't play really, really good, they're on, in my personal opinion, they're on an upset alert here, because for me, this is an Avalanche team until, at least as of recent, until, they show me something in postseason. This is a team that I could see kind of underperforming and getting upset. Last postseason, it seemed like a lot of people were really high on them. They had really high expectations, and they just didn't live up to them. So by no means do I think they're not a great team that's very capable. They're just one of those teams that I'm a little bit leery about and could see them, potentially slipping up and getting upset at some point in postseason.
Yeah, and I'm right with you, Garth. That's such a great point. They've had a lot of years where, they win like 50 games or something, have well over 100 points, and then, they can get knocked out in the first or second round. They've had a bit of struggles there. Now, I'm glad you mentioned Cale Makar, because that dude is an absolute monster. 44 points in 44 games. Obviously, they're a leading point defenseman by far, but he's only 22 as well, so he has a lot of potential to get better, and he was still already, like you said, arguably the best offensive defenseman in the league, the only point-per-game guy. But, I mean, other than that, like it says here, Mikko Rantanen, their leading goal scorer with 30 goals, 66 points, also their leading point guy. But, I mean, you have Nathan MacKinnon just behind him with 65. Gabriel Landeskog, 52 points, a plus 14. He also can hit with 81 hits. And, I mean, just a lot of depth here, Garth. Burakovsky, Kadri, Samuel Girard, I'm a big fan of him on the D-line. Devin Tays as well, plus 29. I mean, this team is absolutely stacked, Garth. It's not going to be easy for the Blues, but like we said, it's going to be a bit closer than, a lot of people probably think. And we should probably look at the injuries as well real quick just to see what's kind of going on here. Some major injuries here, Garth. Oscar Sundqvist out with a leg injury. He's kind of, like I said, like a lot of other guys. He's kind of a bottom six depth guy, so it could be worse, but still has a severe injury. Carl Gunnarsson, he's a respectable top six defenseman. He's out as well. Alex Steen, he's regressed a little bit, but this is still a veteran guy, Garth. He's been there on that team for so long with that back injury. He's going to be out. Just a depth defenseman here, Scott Pernovich. And then, just kind of a few more depth guys. Now, Colton Parayko's an interesting one. We'll see how he comes back. Same thing with James Schwartz. He's a great player. Vince Dunn, also a really good player. Some injuries here, Garth, but luckily I'd say, the major injuries are to kind of depth guys, and the minor injuries that are affecting their better players. Hopefully they don't, nag them or anything like that.
Right. And, looking at this list, though, there really isn't any guys that jump out to me that make me really worried. What I will say, though, is should this series go 6 or 7 games, some of those injuries to the depth guys, that may end up having a big impact. As we all know, when you get later on in the series, especially if it's been a physical one with a lot of hits, it takes a toll on guys. And, you physically see it on the ice if the depth pieces aren't there and guys are having to, play a lot longer shifts than they should have to if the depth guys were there.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. It's going to be very interesting to see how these guys come back because they need everyone going at full strength against a team, of Colorado's capabilities. And, just looking at their injuries as well real quick. Matt Calvert, another kind of depth forward. Bowen Byram, he's a really young defenseman, Garth. I think he has some development to do, but I think he could be a really good player. He's out, day to day as well. Expected to be back at least May 16th. That's only 2 days away. Nathan McKinnon, obviously, arguably their best player here at center. Hopefully he's okay as well. Saad, kind of, a middle six guy. Eric Johnson, same thing, kind of a top four defenseman there. Dubnyk, who's a backup, and then, a couple of depth guys. Now, what I'm looking at here, Garth, is very interesting. Obviously, see both Devin Dubnyk and Pavel Francouz are on this injury list. God forbid, if something happens to Phil Grubauer and these guys aren't exactly ready to go, I mean, Francouz is out, expected until September 15th. If something happens to Grubauer and, Dubnyk has to come in for a game, he's not exactly, fit coming off of COVID, that could be a massive concern for Colorado, I think.
Yeah, most definitely. And I will say that, Grubauer is a great goalie. He has good numbers on the season, but I will say that, going back and looking at, some of the individual games, there has been some games where he's kind of, let up some goals. He really hasn't had the best performances. So overall, great goalie, but there is the potential for him to have a breakdown and, have one of those games where he lets up a lot of goals. And like you said, if there's no depth behind him, that could potentially be a problem for them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the key thing here, Garth, is that I think Grubauer had a better season than a guy like Jordan Binnington. Jordan Binnington, okay stats, 2.65 goals against, 910 save percentage. But he, like we mentioned, he has that playoff experience. He's won a Stanley Cup. He was great for them during that Stanley Cup run. And sure, Phil Grubauer, 9.26%, he was fantastic this year. Was one of the best in the league, I'd say. He doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. I know he played for him, a few years ago, and he went like 7-5 or something like that. So it's not like he has absolutely no experience like some of the guys we mentioned, but there's still a bit of uncertainty there. He's a good goalie. I'd say advantage Jordan Binnington here.
Yeah, I would have to agree, Noah, because as you said, at least in what I've seen and, watching hockey in my short time, is it seems like goalies who do have the experience, they've been there before, seem to outshine and outperform these guys who on paper are really good and stats-wise are good, but they don't have the experience. Postseason is just a whole nother animal. Guys, not that they don't play hard in the regular season, no, but these guys are leaving it absolutely all out there on the ice. And obviously the fans will make some kind of impact too. That definitely adds pressure to the younger guys.
I think Wayne Gretzky said it best. He said there's 3 parts to, an NHL season: the regular season, the playoffs, and the Stanley Cup Finals. And you can play well in the regular season, but the playoffs are a completely different beast. Now, I think, like you said, the Avalanche have had a couple years where they've been great in the regular season, kind of came up short in the playoffs. The Blues, like we mentioned, obviously won a championship recently. I think this series is going to be a lot closer than a lot of people think. To be honest, I think I'm going to pick the Avalanche, Garth, just barely, but I'm going to say Avalanche in 7 here. I think it's going to be a really close series.
Yeah, and, I don't mean to agree with you all night, Noah, but I was going to say that I'm going to pick this one to go to 7. I feel like I kind of got to have a little bit of a different pick than the experts, at least in one series. And for me, this is the one where I could for sure seeing it go to 7 games. Like you said, I am going to pick the Avalanche, but I'm going to say it goes to 7. I'm going to say that the Blues, shock some people and play really tough overall in the series.
I agree. And just back at track and real quick here, Garth, to your team real quick. Mike says this is a chance for Stamkos to lead us to 1 since he couldn't last year. You made a really good point here, Garth. I don't want to backtrack from these series real quick, but you said this is a legacy-defining year for him. Obviously, he came back in that Stanley Cup Finals. I think it was Game 5. He scored a big goal in that game, but he wasn't really a contributor to that playoff run. Maybe as a captain he was down, maybe that motivated his guys a bit. But this is the first real chance he has to win a Stanley Cup. Being a massive contributor. Obviously, everyone knows he's a fantastic player and all that. And you can't say he's never won a ring, but he's never won a ring where he's been a massive, contributor. So, what do you think a ring for him would mean to his legacy?
Yeah, like you said, no, I said earlier today that it was definitely a legacy postseason for him. Obviously he wasn't there in 2004. And, he's had his chances. I don't really think that it was specifically his fault by any means. He's, played well throughout his career, but he's had some chances. He's come up short. Obviously last season he was injured, came in, scored that goal, as you said, re-injured himself in the process. So, he definitely had maybe some emotional motivation for his teammates. He was there as a captain. They probably played a little bit harder for the sake of trying to get him there and get him a ring. But he hasn't had a postseason where he's been a huge contributor and also won a ring. If he could come in, play the entire postseason, we make Stanley Cup Finals, and God forbid we actually win it all 2 back-to-back years, and he's a huge contributor. I think that elevates his legacy a lot. I think it probably takes him from being a career really good player to one of those career great players. I think that, by no means does it put him on like the Mount Rushmore of hockey players, but it definitely takes him up, a tier, regardless of what kind of title or name you want to put it on him. I just think it elevates his career as a whole just a little bit.
I agree, Garth. And, obviously I have a soft spot for Stamkos. You got me that jersey and all. He's just been a player I've always loved and respected his entire career. But it's, it's hard to deny there's a difference between his playoff production and his regular season. In regular season, 866 points in 841 games, a plus 48. In the playoffs, 54 points in 71 games and a minus 11. So, it's not all his fault, like you said. I'm not saying that at all. I think especially when they played Columbus, they just got beat down in that series, Garth. You'll admit it as well. But like you said, I think he could still make the Hall of Fame. But if he won a Stanley Cup and, he was a great contributor, potential Conn Smythe winner, I mean, that would just mean all the world. He'd be a no-doubt Hall of Famer then. And, David getting his input put in on Stamkos real quick. Stamkos is trash. What do you think about that, Garth?
I'll just shake my head at that one. I don't know if David actually believes that. He's most likely just saying that to get me fired up. But, I'll just shake my head at you, Dave. But, like you said there, no, if he were to win a Conn Smythe, and, that for sure gets him into the Hall of Fame. There's been so many great players that, I really hope that he does get that done. Maybe, it doesn't need to win the Conn Smythe, but if he did, that would be huge. But just be a huge contributing factor, have a good, overall playoff run, and hopefully win a ring as, being a main contributor to the team.
Absolutely, Garth. And, I would really love that to happen for him again. And, it'd be great for him. And, speaking of great, the next series just absolutely star-studded talent all over. We have the Winnipeg Jets going up against the Edmonton Oilers, number 3 against number 2. Now, Garth, this is a series that, like I said, it's just absolutely stacked with talent here. Now, the Jets, obviously, unfortunately, they had to relocate from Atlanta in 2011. They're still looking for their first title. And the Oilers, Garth, the key thing for them is they have the best player in the league in Connor McDavid. Leon Draisaitl, as well, is just right there. I believe he was second in points behind McDavid. They have absolute superstar talent. Their offense is probably the best in the league, I'd say. But they haven't won a Stanley Cup with these guys yet. They've had top pick after top pick, number 1 pick. Connor McDavid was the number pick. Draisaitl was number 3. I can think of Ryan Nugent-Hopkins as well was the number 1. Taylor Hall a few years ago, obviously he's not there anymore, was the number 1. It's tough to say, Garth, but they just have so much talent. You got to think that they eventually can break through and, make a deep playoff run or potentially win it all.
Yeah, and like Stamkos and, as we said, legacy-defining postseason, this is a very impactful legacy postseason for Connor McDavid. This is a guy who, as you said, is the best player in the league. He's had fantastic seasons in the past, but he's, unfortunately come up short in postseason play. They have to at least win this series and get past, the first round, in my opinion, for the sake of him. And as you said, Draisaitl too, they're not short of talent across the board. But, Connor McDavid, He's got to have a really good series. He's got to help lead this high-powered offense. They're going to have a tough matchup because we'll get into the goaltender talk a little bit later on in this matchup. But, they're going to be tasked going up against a pretty solid goaltender back there. So he's going to have to power this offense through this series. It's really cool that we're getting to see these Canadian teams face off in the first round. I think it's pretty obvious that there's a rivalry here, as there is with all these Canadian teams. Unfortunately, none of these teams will have fans, as I said earlier in the show. That is what it is. It sucks, but, at least we still have them playing playoff hockey up there. And, they do have home ice to a degree, just with no fans. But, yeah, this is a really good matchup of just two teams that have a ton of talent. When they both play well, they're very potent offenses. I will say that the Jets kind of really skidded towards the end of regular season play. Hopefully they've kind of bounced back and they're going to come ready to play in this series so that we do get a very good series. This is, again, another series that could just be so good, in my opinion, Noah.
I agree. I mean, and it has all the talent you could want. Obviously, we'll get into the Jets players a little later, but just looking at these stats, Garth, I mean, they're absolutely insane. McDavid, 33 goals. He was only second in the league behind only Matthews. Led the league in assists with 71. Led the league in points with 104, Garth. 104 points in something like 54 games. I mean, absolutely unreal. Leon Draisaitl plus 31, again, league leading. And then the key thing for this series, Garth, is their defense, because I think the thing is they've always had this offensive talent. What's their defense going to do? And I think they've had a big resurgence. Tyson Barrie, 48 points as a defenseman, led the league for all defensemen. Darnell Nurse as well, plus 29 on that blue line. They need these guys to produce because, they've had the offensive production before, but the problem they've always had is their defense could not hold a lead at all. Their goalies, weren't the best. We mentioned Cam Talbot earlier. He was the guy there for a few years. What are you looking at for this team? They're kind of like the Penguins, I'd say. Really high-flying offense, a bit of a suspect defense for a few years.
Yeah, and, a defense that is not that good is going to be really, really tested because, as we've already said, this Oilers offense is really good, led by McDavid and Draisaitl. I just got to see them play good. They don't need to play great, but they can't afford to play terrible. They've got some guys that are capable of playing well on the defensive side. They just need to actually play well. Josh Morrissey, Neil Pionk, they've got guys on that side of the ice. They've just got to play well. And like I said, no, I don't think that they have to play great because the offense can keep them in games. They just can't have breakdowns and play terrible, or they're going to be in for a long series.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, obviously the Oilers are absolutely, stacked offensively. You can't overlook the Jets, though. They still have plenty of great players. I mean, Kyle Connor, the leading goal scorer with 24. Mark Scheifele, 61 points in 55 games. I think he's a fantastic center. We showed him in the preview real quick right here. There's Mark Scheifele with Connor McDavid, just two of the best centers in the league right there. And then, you have guys like Nikolai Ehlers, 46 points, a plus 15, which led the team. Blake Wheeler, 44 points. Just a lot of depth here, Garth. I'm glad you mentioned Neil Pionk, 32 points, their leading scorer at defense. He's going to have to be their main guy. Josh Morrissey coming in, Derek Forbort. But I think, a guy like Neil Pionk here, obviously they got him in a trade with Brian's New York Rangers a few years ago. I think he's overachieved. No one expected that he would be this much of an impact guy right away. But that defense, they're going to have a lot of workout going up against this Oilers offense that we already mentioned is just loaded with talent,
Yeah, like I said, no, they can't afford to play bad, but they don't need to play great because they do have just as big of an ability to score offensively as the Oilers do. They have some good depth top to bottom. And, the thing that I like most about them is even though their defensive men, might not be top tier in terms of defense, but they can score really well. As you said, they've had some guys overachieve in terms of goals and points. So I want to see them take advantage of the opportunities that they're given. They've got to score in transition. They've got to kind of control the pace of the game in terms of, time with the puck. I feel like they've got to win that battle. Shots on goal, that kind of stuff that doesn't always lead to wins, but, definitely helps. So really my biggest factor in this game is what is that Jets defense going to do? Are they going to break down? Are they going to let up a lot of goals? Or are they not going to look that great? Or are they going to play, well enough to make it a competitive series?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Jets offense is really solid. The key thing here is, Garth, two defenses that have a lot to prove. The Oilers defense has struggled for years, and the Jets are obviously going to have it out for them, defending all the forwards and defensemen that the Oilers have that are, just great at putting the puck in the back of the net. One of the top scoring teams in the entire league. Before we get into the goalies and all that, let's just go over the injuries real quick once again. Just looking over the Jets here real quick. I think Nikolai Ehlers, like I said, plus 15. He's a really solid player that they might miss. Nathan Beaulieu is out on IR until September. He's kind of a depth guy, though, so that's not a big deal. Brian Little, unfortunately, I think his career's gotten over. He's only played 7 games the past 2 years. He's a really good player, but, he's just not been a factor all year. Tucker Pullman and Andrew Kopp. Andrew Kopp's actually been a really good player for him this year, Garth. 39 points to 55 games, plus 2. So, I mean, some decent losses here, but, once again, it's kind of been the story of these injury reports. Nothing too major here.
Right. I got to agree. Not, a couple of guys on there that you mentioned that they would like to have in the lineup, but, if they're not, does it cost them the series? Probably not.
Yeah, absolutely. And, now the Edmonton Oilers list is a bit longer. Ryan McLeod and Kailer Yamamoto, they're both really young guys with a lot of promise, but luckily they're both day-to-day. Joakim Nygard, he's kind of a depth guy as well. Same with Haas. Chris Russell's a really good defenseman, so, good, solid top 4, top 6 defenseman. So hopefully he comes back soon. Zach Cassian, just a really solid bottom 6 guy. He checks, he fights. He's kind of like that Ryan Reeves I mentioned earlier. He's really solid. Oscar Klefbom out for the entire playoffs. That's a big loss for them, Garth, because I think he's a really solid defenseman. If he was healthy, I'd say he's probably, the best defenseman on their roster. But the key thing for this, Garth, unfortunately, you don't want Klefbom to get hurt, but then you have guys like, Tyson Berry and Darnell Nurse who absolutely stepped up for them, and they need those guys on the defense to, finally give them, a respectable defense in the playoffs.
Yeah, and, looking down this list now, my opinion is very similar to the Jets. There's guys here that they'd like to have in the rotation, but if they can't play, it isn't the end of the world. But I will say, like I said before, if this series drags on Game 6, Game 7, and those guys aren't good to go, the depth could be potentially an issue, especially for a defense that's going to be tested.
Yeah, absolutely, Garth. And I think a key for, these high-flying offenses, a bit of suspect defenses on both sides, which goaltender is going to have the better series. Now, I think, Connor Hellebuyck is one of the best goaltenders in the league, 2.60 goals against, 950 save percentage, just a really solid guy. The problem I had with him is last year, and a bit of all the playoffs he's been in, he's really struggled sometimes. Last year especially, he had a game where he gave up like 4 or 5 goals in an elimination game. He has a bit of a point to prove, a bit of a chip on his shoulder, if you will. And the other side, Mike Smith, he's 39 years old, but this guy that's been in the league for so long, Garth, never been, this elite goaltender or anything, but he's always been a guy that's just really solid, really respectable goaltender. Had a great year this year as well, 923 save percentage. He's been in the playoffs a few times. He's not been on the greatest teams, but when he's gone in, he's done a respectable job as well. So what are you seeing here, Garth? Just a really solid goalie going up against, a potential superstar goalie that has something to prove.
Yeah, I got to give a slight advantage here to the Jets just because of how talented Hellebuyck is. But as you said, he definitely has had some postseason question marks. You mentioned that breakdown he had last postseason, in a series that's going to be very, very close and decided, most likely on the offensive side of things. He cannot have that happen. He definitely has something to prove after last postseason. And on the other side, Mike Smith, a guy who's just been in the league forever. He's got the experience. He's been there. He could potentially be a very solid piece for them. Or maybe the Jets can take advantage and, have some good games against him. Like I said, I got to go give a slight edge here to Winnipeg.
Yeah, I agree, Garth. It's a very interesting series. It's tough to call, but I think at the end of the day, these two guys are just going to be a bit too much for the Jets to handle. I think it's going to be a close series. I don't think it's going to be, a sweep or anything, but probably going to go Oilers in 6 here, Garth.
Yeah, and I'm going to have to say the same thing, Oilers in 6. I just feel like McDavid finally has to power through and win the series. I always say that eventually all things do come to an end. And I think that finally in a hard fought series, the Oilers are just going to be a little bit too much for a defense that has, a few too many question marks. And I think that Connor McDavid and Drysdale are just going to get it done and win probably 4-2 in 6 games.
I agree, Garth. And, one more matchup to go here. This is potentially, it's not the biggest on paper, but this is easily the biggest rivalry we've had. The Montreal Canadiens going up against the Toronto Maple Leafs, Number 4 Montreal against number 1. We see Shea Weber and Austin Matthews here. Garth, I think the key thing for this is original 6 rivalry. These teams have been around forever, obviously. And they're the most successful franchises historically in the NHL. Obviously, 37 combined Stanley Cups. That's not a typo. I actually looked this up. 24 for Montreal, which is first. 13 for Toronto, which is second. Like I said, 2 most historically successful franchises. They've been rivals for, a freaking century, basically. I mean, what more could you want for a playoff series here, Garth? I think it's going to be very chippy, very physical series.
Yeah, this is easily one of the series that I'm most excited for, Noah. I got a fun fact here. This is their first playoff meeting since 1979. Really the only thing that upsets me with this series is the fact that they're not going to have packed fans. I couldn't even imagine, this series should it go game 6, game 7 with packed arenas. But yeah, just for the sake of the rivalry. And, on top of that, these are teams that are pretty good. Especially on the Leafs side. What an offense. Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, these are 2, one of the best duos in terms of scoring in the whole NHL. Especially Mitch Marner has been top tier for the past couple seasons, but Austin Matthews has really been lighting it up all season. And they're both top 10 in terms of scoring in the NHL. And at times Matthews just kind of had his way on the ice, made it look easy scoring goals, which by no means is. So I'm just sake of rivalry, 2 Canadian teams going at it. As you said, all the history that's going into this matchup. I'm really excited for this one, Noah.
I mean, absolutely. And just start with the Maple Leafs here. Austin Matthews, 41 goals, which obviously was, a league leading. So he's going to win the Maurice Richard. But like you said, Mitch Marner, I think he's a bit overshadowed a bit. I'm not saying people don't think he's a great player, but I think because he's on the same team as a guy like Matthews who can, score at will. Mitch Marner sets up a lot of that, man. He's easily one of the best playmakers in the league, 47 assists. He was also the leading point guy with 67. And it's not just them, Garth. John Tavares, they're 50 points at plus 13. William Nylander, 42 plus 11. They also, they get good production from their defensemen. Like I said, like it says there, Morgan Rielly was their leading defenseman with 34 points. He was a plus 14. They also had a guy like TJ Brody that's a plus 26, is incredible. Jake Muzzin there, a plus 20. The key for the Leafs, Garth, I think they're a team a bit like the Penguins and Oilers that I mentioned. Fantastic offense. Their defense has let them down repeatedly in past postseasons, especially against the Bruins. And that's not something you can have against a team like the Bruins, Garth. They will wear you down. They will fight you. They will check the hell out of you. You need some good defense, some toughness, and what are you seeing from the Leafs here?
Yeah, man. Honestly, the Leafs are starting to get to that point to where it's, actually very similar to my Lightning before we finally pulled it off last season. This is a team that hasn't seen second round action in 17 years now. These guys keep coming into the playoffs. They're great offensively. They get a lot of hype, and they just some way or another end up getting eliminated in the first round. They're one of the teams that kind of went all out this offseason and also were even pretty active at the trade deadline. For me, outside neutral fan towards them looking in, to me, everything I've seen from them screams we're going, Stanley Cup or bust. We were trying to win it all this year. And I think there's going to be a lot of very, very upset Leaf fans out there if they don't at least win this series, against a very hated rivalry in the Canadiens.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, like you said, they haven't made it past the first round in 20 years. It sucks, when you face one of your biggest rivals in the Bruins, they knock you out of the playoffs 3 times. And I believe all of them were, in 6 or 7 games. So that's got to be even more heartbreaking. I remember the first one back in 2013. They had something like a 4-1 lead in the third period, and they blew it and lost in overtime. That just had to hurt for them. But not only that, Garth, these are 2 teams that both have severe title droughts. The Maple Leafs haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. The Canadiens were actually the last Canadian team to win a Stanley Cup back in 1993. The two most successful franchises in history, but both were going through a rough patch. And when you look at the Canadiens, obviously they don't have all the talent that can match the high-powered offense of the Maple Leafs, but I think they still have some good players. Tyler Toffoli, their leading goal scorer with 28. He was also the leading point guy. Jeff Petrie, Garth, really underrated defenseman here. 30 points and 30 assists and 42 points as a defenseman. Really solid. A career year for him, I'd say a +6. Other than that, I mean, they have some key guys. Brendan Gallagher, I really like. He was a bit injured, banged up, only played 35 games, +10. But I'm not seeing, the kind of depth that you want to see, Garth. They have some, obviously made the playoffs. They do have some top-tier players like Toffoli and Petrie, but I think a lot of their, offense is based around younger guys like Nick Suzuki, Kotkaniemi as well, that they drafted number 3 overall a few years ago. There's a bit of uncertainty in this forward core. It's not when you look at, a team like the Islanders or the Predators, they're just really solid top to bottom. I think they have some good guys, but, I think their depth is lacking a bit here.
Yeah, most definitely. Unfortunately for them, they're not like some of these, more heavily favored teams that we've covered tonight where they do have, a lot of guys throughout the lineup that can score, and they don't really have that star power as well. So they've kind of, they're counting on a lot of guys to play pretty good versus a few guys to play well. We'll get into the injuries later, but one thing that does kind of concern me with them is they are pretty banged up headed into the series. With some guys who are, pretty impactful. And one other thing real quick, just backtracking to the Leafs now, that's going to be a huge boost for them, is they are getting Zach Hyman. He's coming back to pair with Matthews and Marner in that top line, so that's just going to make things for the Leafs even that much more, powerful in terms of offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Zach Hyman, he's a really solid player. Like you said, he's not an elite guy or anything, but he can fit in your top 6 if you need him to. He's a really solid top 9 guy as well. He can produce a few goals and assists here, but what I really like about him as well, he's really solid defensively, Garth. I mean, this is just a really good two-way player. 69 hits, 21 blocks. I mean, he could just kind of do it all for them. So I think that's a great return for them as well. And then, looking at their injuries again, now Mitch Marner expected to be out until at least May 20th. So luckily for them, they have a long wait. So I think that's actually when game 1 starts. So hopefully he'll be able to come back. He was rested, obviously. So hopefully there's nothing that he needed to be rested for other than just a bit of, saving him for the playoffs. Scott Sabrin, a depth guy. Zach Hyman, who I already mentioned. Riley Nash and Zach Bogosian, both depth guys. So, once again, another team that doesn't really have a lot of injury concerns here.
Yeah, and there's yet again another face I know well in Zach Bogosian, kind of seeming like every single one of these playoff teams has a guy who was on my Lightning last season. But yeah, as you said, he's just kind of a depth guy there. You might see him in penalty kill situations. You'll see him in probably that third line should he be healthy, or fourth even. I don't really know where they play him. I don't, haven't seen a ton of them this season. But just some depth guys really on their side for injuries. Yeah,
absolutely, Garth. I mean, luckily, their main guys, Marner was rested, Matthews, he's perfectly fine, so that's key for them. Looking at the Canadiens, obviously a much longer list here, but once again, I mean, just kind of day-to-day injuries, they should be fine. I mean, like I said, this series starts next Thursday, Garth. It's the longest wait by far. I mean, the Leafs haven't even finished the regular season. They play tomorrow, I believe. But, just looking over real quick, a bunch of depth guys here, and Philip Deneau, Brendan Gallagher. Carey Price with this concussion, he should be fine, but, obviously he's their starting goalie. That's going to be interesting to watch. Shea Weber, he's had some issues this year, but, that's their best defenseman. When he's healthy, he should be okay. And then Anderson Toffoli, he should be fine. He was just rested. Jeff Petrie, like I mentioned, really big fan of him. Jonathan Drouin, who – when he's on, Garth, and, I don't think he watched the Lightning when he was still there, but just a really solid goal scorer when he's on. But the thing about him, he's very inconsistent. So if he could come to the lineup, from this illness, potentially give them a spark, that could be key for them because they need to be able to score goals to keep up with the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Right, and for me, the name that jumps out the most at me is Brendan Gallagher. I got a stat here for you that the Canadiens are 17-9-9 with Gallagher playing and on the ice, and they are 7-11 without him. And he has kind of, I wouldn't say it's a super serious injury, but something, a sore muscle versus an actual fractured thumb, that might be something that's a little bit more, on the severe side. But hockey players are really tough, as we all know. I'm sure he'll play through it. It just might impact him a little bit. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out. But yeah, like I said, they are banged up. There's a lot of guys here that they're going to need to be able to play and play well. And I expect them to, especially with it being the rivalry in the series that it is. But also, if they aren't 100% and they're struggling with injuries, these are guys that are going to make things really, really tough for them, because they are some big impact players. Tyler Toffoli with 28 goals, as we said earlier, and Jeff Petrie with 42 points. And I had the record there with Gallagher. So, definitely guys that they really need to be able to play and play well.
Absolutely. And I think, Brendan Gallagher is so key because, like I said, he's just a well-rounded player. And they need their defense to be able to at least somewhat hold the Maple Leafs. You're not going to stop them. They just have way too much talent. But, you need guys like a Jeff Petrie, who had a great year this year. You need Joel Edmondson, who was a plus 28. And the thing about Joel Edmondson as well, Garth, he obviously was on the St. Louis Blues when they won the Stanley Cup. So that's another guy that has that playoff experience. And on a team that, is really so young, other than Tyler Toffoli, I think most of their guys don't have a lot of playoff experience. That's going to be key for them. So real quick, Garth, before we get into our predictions, let's just go over the goaltender situation. I think this is pretty interesting. Now, I think the Canadians had the advantage here because obviously they have Carey Price. Now, he had a bit of a down year, only a 901 save percentage, but he's just been so good for so long, one of the best goalies in the NHL. And when he gets to the playoffs, he does a good job. The biggest weakness I see for the Leafs here is that, obviously Jack Campbell had a great year for them, 923 save percentage, 2.11. He's another guy, Garth, absolutely no playoff experience at all. He's been a career backup. He came out of the nowhere this year to, go on an insane run. He won like 12 straight games at one point, which is absolutely insane. He was great, but this is a team, Garth, that's always had a bit of goalie issues in the playoffs. Obviously, Frederik Andersen, like it says at the bottom, he's had a terrible year this year. He's always struggled in the playoffs, and they're going with a guy that, really unknown in the playoffs here, Garth. What are you seeing from Jack Campbell and Carey Price?
Yeah, so I actually got a note written down here regarding Carey Price. People are kind of wondering which Carey Price are they going to get, because as we have seen, this is a guy who can play really, really well, and he has for a long time now. We also have seen a little bit of inconsistency issues from him, so I think the question mark here is, are we going to get the Carey Price that we've seen play really, really well, or maybe he struggles a little bit? I got a number written down here. Last season in the bubble, 936 save percentage and 2 shutouts. If he can play like that in this series, that's going to make life for the Canadians much, much easier. The less goals that they have to score per game to win, it is definitely going to give them a much higher percentage of winning this series, and making up for, a defense that is not top tier and might be banged up a little bit. He's going to have a really, really big role to play in this game. And as you said, on the other side, we've got a guy who doesn't have the playoff experience, hasn't been here in this situation before. So I got to go give the edge to the Jets, and I think that this is a matchup within the game that they got to take big, big advantage of if you're the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah, I think with Carey Price, he's a bit of a hot and cold goalie in the playoffs, I'd say. When he's on, like you mentioned the bubble last year. Of course, he had to do that against the Penguins, go figure. But, he was just absolutely fantastic. But, he has a bit of struggles as well. But, like you said, when he's on, he's on. And if he is on, they need him to play at the best that he can against that offense. And going up against a guy that's really unknown, like we said, the Montreal Canadiens, they might not have a lot of offensive firepower, but they do have some respectable players. Potentially could take advantage of a guy with absolutely no playoff experience. Who are you going with, Garth? Because, to be honest, I just think the Maple Leafs have way too much here. I think this is probably the most one-sided one on paper, in my opinion. I think I'm going to go Leafs in 5.
Yeah, I got to agree with you here, Noah. I'm saying Leafs 4-1 in 5 games. I do think that the Canadians play them very tough in a physical aspect. Maybe they bang them up a little bit and make the second round a little bit tougher on them. But I just think that top to bottom, the Leafs just have too much for a Canadians team that isn't bad, but it is not great either. And also, being banged up, even if it's minor, I just feel like they have a ton of key guys that, are going to be battling injuries here. And I don't see the Jets having enough to just slow down how good this offense has been all season. And like I said earlier in the broadcast, eventually everything comes to an end. I just feel like the Leafs finally make it to the second round again.
I agree. If they don't do it now, they're never going to do it, honestly, because obviously it's a great rivalry. We're not going to overlook the Canadians here, but on paper the Leafs just have so much offense. Their only real concern, I'd say, is potentially a bit of defense in the rookie, or they're not a rookie, but a goalie who's never played in the playoffs. I think Carey Price is going to have to play the absolute best he can. They're going to need their better players like Toffoli and Petrie to make an impact, but they got to get it done, Garth. I mean, no Stanley Cup since 1967. They have the talent to go deep in the playoffs. But it's just, can their defense and goaltending hold up? I think that's the only real concern for them.
Yeah, and as I said, this is a team where everything in the offseason, making moves at the trade deadline, I feel like they're all in to try and make it to the Stanley Cups and win it. And I feel like for the Leafs, the expectations and the pressure is really, really high this postseason. They've got to try and get it done.
Yeah, absolutely, Garth. And none since 1967, but they're not going to have it easy because everyone wants this thing right here, Garth. And I did a little tagline here right at the end: 16 teams, 4 rounds, but only 1 goal. I mean, this is what they all play for, Garth. And in my opinion, hockey's probably my second favorite sport just behind football, but I honestly think the Stanley Cup playoffs are probably my favorite postseason. The difference from regular season hockey is just insane. Everyone's just checking, they're hitting as hard as they can. The defense is just really solid. I mean, teams like the New York Islanders, with their defense and all that, they're kind of the first team that comes to mind for Stanley Cup playoff levels of defense. I mean, it's just really solid. Every team is really good. There's teams like the Oilers, the Penguins, and the Hurricanes and all that. Just absolute superstar talent, Garth. But there's also these teams like the Predators and the Islanders that I mentioned, just really solid top to bottom. Could potentially, force an upset if something happens. And you know what? I'm really excited to keep covering this for weeks to come, and obviously, continue previewing the rounds as they go.
Yeah, like you said, Noah, NHL isn't quite my favorite sport as much as I love it, but Stanley Cup playoffs, man, the only thing that I might slightly put above it in terms of postseason play is March Madness. And it, like I said, that would be just the tiniest bit above it. I absolutely love Stanley Cup playoffs. Every year for the past 3 years now that I've been watching, hockey pretty closely, I've just been counting the days to this. I sit down now, and honestly, unless I physically can't because of work or, something with family, I'll sit down and watch every single game. I just love it that much. As you said, these guys just play so hard. I love the play-by-play announcers, man. They're freaking awesome in my opinion. I just sit down and enjoy it. I enjoy all the games, and I especially obviously get really fired up when my Lightning are out there and playing well.
Absolutely, man. And, obviously I was with you all the way last year in the Lightning, but, unfortunately this time we got to be enemies because the Penguins, they're still in it. And it's going to be really exciting, man. But, let's just end it off real quick with this. I think this is like one of the only things that you put in here, this GIF right here. I see who the teams are. I'm just going to play it real quick. I don't even know what happens, so let's see. Kucherov there, obviously. He's going to be key for you guys. But, man, I tell you what, I would not be surprised at all if we meet in the Eastern Conference Finals, Garth. That would be an insane series, a lot of trash talking going on. But I think we both have the capabilities to make a deep run.
Yeah, most definitely. Like I said, you guys are one of the hottest teams in the league right now. That offense is just clicking and playing really, really well. And for us, we're just, much like last season, we're very balanced, and hopefully Kuch and Stamkos coming back can, really elevate our offense. Just obviously really, really looking forward to this now. We're going to get to see a lot of really, really good hockey games. I think that this season is, a little bit special, not only because of the fact that we are able to have matchups that we've never had before in the playoffs, but I think that there's a lot of teams this year that you can honestly sit back, look over their roster top to bottom and say, this team playing their best hockey is capable of winning it this year. So, I think for just those combinations, it makes for what's going to be a very, very good Stanley Cup playoffs.
Absolutely, Garth. And I was a bit unsure about this kind of playoff format, division format when it first was announced, but the way it's shaping up, we have a lot of great matchups. I can't complain about too much at all. And obviously another great show, Garth. Well over 2 hours here. A few comments coming in, a lot of analysis. All my hard work, it actually paid off. I'm really glad to see that. But do you have anything to throw in before we sign off for the night? It's getting late.
Yeah, I want to say thank you, Noah. It's a huge, help that you put in all the hard work that you did. I think we had a really, really good show, and just overall, I'm so friggin' excited for Stanley Cup playoffs to be back. It feels on one hand like it took forever to get here because I was so excited for it to be here. But at the same time, it also feels like last Stanley Cup finals just finished, so it's kind of the best of both worlds there. I hope that everybody finds some time to watch Stanley Cup playoffs, whether you're a fan of hockey or not, because as I said, these guys just, regular season, obviously they play hard, but come playoffs, these guys are just giving it their literal all out there on the ice. You see these guys come off the ice missing teeth, they're absolutely exhausted. I want to say, Noah, too, something that I didn't know personally until I started following hockey really closely is these guys are only out there for like anywhere from a minute to, sometimes up to 3 minutes, but these shifts aren't very long. But yet these guys are, it takes such a toll on your body just to be out there for that little bit of a, time at a time. I think it speaks for how tough the sport is physically, and mentally.
Absolutely, Garth. These guys, sometimes they only play about a third of the game, especially for forward. That's probably the most they can play. Most of them probably play, about 15 minutes. A defenseman will obviously play a little more, sometimes 25 to 30, but, still, the amount of, effort they have to put in on these, like you said, minute and a half at most shifts. It's absolutely phenomenal. Line changes everywhere. They're just pushing the absolute limits, and that's obviously going to be, brought out even more in the playoffs where, any mistakes could cost you big time. Everyone's going to be, coaching the fundamentals, coaching defense, hard checking. It's going to be everywhere. I'm really excited for it, Garth. I'm really excited. We get to cover it, for several more weeks to come. We'll be back next Friday with the probably, a mid-round one kind of recap and all that, maybe throw in some NFL as well in motorsport. But do you have anything to throw in real quick before we throw this outro up?
No, I'm just going to, again, say thank you, Noah, for all the hard work you put into the show. I appreciate it. I think we had a really, really good show tonight. And, thank everybody that tuned in. And just, be looking forward to us again next Friday night. Absolutely, man. I'm glad my work paid off. And, thanks everyone for watching Sweet Tea. Make sure you keep up with Sports Box, highly opinionated on Tuesday nights, stuff like that. And, be back Friday night because we're going to be talking a lot more hockey. And, from Noah Dog Deibler, Garth Charger Patrick, we'll see you next week. Hopefully everyone watches a ton of hockey. Thank you guys for
Thank you for watching this episode of Sweet Tea on the Sports Box. Please remember to follow us on all of our social media outlets. On Facebook at SportsBox Show, Twitter at SportsBox Show, Instagram at The SportsBox Show. Find us on YouTube and join Outside the Box, our Facebook sports discussion group. The Sports Box is brought to you by our sponsor, Showcase Sports in Hamilton. Showcase Sports for the elite athlete. And also our friends over at CrowdPlay. Download the free CrowdPlay app today and use promo code THEBOX at sign up for 10 free points. Thank you for joining us.